Hi guys. Tonight we step into a winter so sharp it feels like it has teeth. You are standing outside a medieval castle at dusk, and the wind is coming off the fields like a cold river, sliding under your cloak and finding every gap in your clothes. The sky is already bruising purple, and the first stars look a little too bright, the way they do when the air is brutally clear. Somewhere beyond the gatehouse, a horn calls low and tired. You can smell wood smoke, but it is thin, not the thick, cozy promise you might want. It is more like a distant rumor of warmth. And just so we're being honest with each other, you probably won't survive this if you show up in a modern hoodie and optimism. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I love seeing how far these stories travel, while you're all tucked up in different corners of the world. Now, dim the lights and come a little closer to the gate with me. You trudge forward, boots crunching on frozen dirt. The castle rises above you like a cliff made by human hands. Its walls are thick stone, pale in moonlight, with narrow slits for windows that look less like openings and more like scars. You might think thick walls equal warmth. That's the modern brain talking. Here, thick walls mean defense first, comfort maybe later if someone remembers. Medieval builders cared about keeping arrows out, not letting heat in. A guard leans over the parapet, breath puffing white. He squints down at you, half bored, half suspicious. The gate creaks open with that slow, heavy sound that makes your shoulders tense, even though nothing is happening to you. You slip inside, and the world changes. Outside was open, cold. Inside is a different cold, a cold that lingers. The courtyard is sheltered from wind, yes, but the stone under your feet has been sipping frost all day. It gives nothing back. You pass stables on the left, and the smell hits you before the heat does. Manure, hay, wet leather, animal breath. It is not a perfume you'd bottle, but it tells you something important. Animals make warmth. In winter, that matters. The stable boys are moving like they've done this forever, throwing straw, rubbing down horses, cursing quietly through numb fingers. You can hear water in a bucket cracking as it freezes again. Even here, under a roof, the cold is relentless. A door leads into the main hall. You pull it open and step into dim space. The air is smoky, sweet, and stale all at once. A fire burns in a wide hearth, but it isn't the bonfire of your dreams. The flames are busy, orange, snapping at logs, yet the hall still feels like a cave. Warmth pools right by the hearth and fades fast. Take 3 steps away, and you can feel your eyelashes stiffen a little. The hall is long with a high timbered roof. All that volume above you is basically a heat graveyard. Hot air rises and stays up there, leaving you down here with the drafts. You move closer to the fire. The stone around it is blackened and polished by years of hands, spills, and smoke. Someone has hung a cauldron over the flames, and it bubbles lazily. You catch the smell of onions, maybe barley, something meaty if today is a good day. The cook glances at you with the look of a person who has been awake since before sunrise. She does not stop working. Winter is when food has to stretch, and when you need calories like fuel. People in castles ate heavier, fattier meals during cold months, partly because fresh produce was scarce, but also because your body burns through energy just trying to stay warm. That is a mainstream historical fact you can feel in your own stomach right now as it growls at the smell of stew. Beyond the hearth, long tables sit in shadow. Benches are cold enough to make you flinch when you touch them. A rush mat covers part of the floor, straw bundled and scattered to take the bite off the stone. It helps a little. Not much. Your fingers get stiff anyway, and you rub them, listening to the quiet chorus of winter life. There is always sound, but it is muted. A dog scratching, a servant's steps, the low talk of people huddled in cloaks. The hall is social, political, ceremonial, but in winter it is also a survival zone. Everyone wants to be near the heat. Everyone wants the best spot, but only some people get it. Your eyes are just enough to pick out the Lord's chair at the far end, raised, backed, draped in thick fabric. You can already guess who sits closest to warmth. Hierarchy in a castle is not just about power, it is about temperature. The nearer you are to privilege, the nearer you are to the fire. The farther you are from it, the colder your night will be. You feel a draft snake past your knees. Where is it coming from? Everywhere. Cracks in doors, gaps under shutters. The hall's big entrance is a mouth that keeps breathing cold air in and warm air out. Medieval castles, for all their might, were not sealed systems. They were leaky, on purpose sometimes, because smoke needed to escape. Chimneys existed in many castles by the later Middle Ages. Yes, but they were not perfect, and earlier halls often relied on roof vents and louvers. So you get this constant trade, warmth for air, air for warmth, and you are the one paying the bill with your shoulders hunched. Someone passes you a cup. It is warm to the touch. Ale, probably. You sip. It is not fancy, but it is thick and steady. There is a quiet truth here. Warm drinks plus alcohol plus calories are a triple blanket for your insides. People did not drink ale only for fun. It was safer than water sometimes, and it carried energy. It also makes the cold feel less personal for a while. The taste is yeasty, slightly sour, and you can feel it spreading through your chest like a small fire of its own. Near the hearth, you notice something small and odd, a pouch on a string, hung on a peg by the fire. The servant who sees you staring grins and tells you what it is. Not in your language, of course, but you get the gist by the little mime he does. It is a foot warmer. Inside are heated herbs or stones, tied up to keep the heat near the body. People also used hot bricks wrapped in cloth, or metal pans filled with embers, shoved into bedding before sleep. Here is a quirky tidbit for you. In some households, they warmed beds with ceramic pig bottles, basically hollow clay animals filled with hot water and tucked by the feet. Medieval people were not cute on purpose, but sometimes survival gets adorable by accident. You glance upward and see soot stains climbing the walls like dark ivy. Winter fires burn longer, and smoke has years to paint the stone. Inhaling this air every day was the price of comfort. Your throat feels dry already, and you have only been here minutes. Imagine centuries of lungs, coughing quietly into sleeves while trying to look proper. Somewhere in the hall, a priest murmurs a blessing over food. Candlelight flickers. Wax smells faintly sweet. You feel the pleasant ache of heat on your face, and the sting of cold on your back, like your body is divided into two seasons. And you start to understand the core of castle winter life. It is not about being warm. It is about managing cold. It is about patches of heat in an ocean of chill, and 1,000 little habits to make those patches last. Historians still argue whether castles were kept deliberately colder to reduce rot and vermin, or whether people simply accepted the discomfort as normal and inevitable. You can feel both possibilities here. The dry cold might protect storerooms. The drafty hall might be a compromise between smoke control and comfort. Or maybe everyone just shrugged and said, well, that's winter. The way you shrug at rain you cannot stop. Your eyelids grow heavy from the fire's flicker. The hall hums in low voices. Outside, the wind keeps worrying the walls, like a patient animal. You shift your weight closer to the hearth, and the stones under your feet feel a tiny bit less cruel. This is your first night in a world without central heating. You are not going to conquer winter. You are going to negotiate with it, hour by hour, room by room. And as you stand there, warming your hands, you realize this castle is not just a fortress against enemies. In January, it is a fortress against the sky itself. The story is already starting to wrap around you like a heavy cloak, and we're only at the gate. You stay close to the hearth a little longer, letting your fingers remember what warmth feels like. But the hall is only one pocket of this place, and winter makes you curious in a cautious way. You step back into the dimness, and the heat falls off you so fast it's almost funny. Almost. The castle seems to exhale cold from its own bones. You pull your cloak tighter and start to walk, because if you stop moving for too long, your joints feel like they're filling with water that's about to freeze. The passageway outside the hall is narrow, built for defensibility, not comfort. The walls are rough stone, and if you press your palm against them, you can feel the stored chill, like touching the inside of a well. Some castles use limestone or granite, some sandstone, but all of it acts the same in winter. It absorbs cold all night, then takes its sweet time giving anything back. A mainstream historical fact to anchor you here is that many medieval castles had walls 2 to 4 meters thick. Great for stopping siege engines, terrible for the human nervous system when the temperature drops. Thick stone is slow. It stays cold long after the sun is gone, and even after a fire has been burning for hours. Your breath fogs in front of you as you follow a servant carrying a bundle of rushes. He doesn't look cold in the way you do. He looks like he has made a truce with it years ago. The corridor turns abruptly, then turns again. The layout feels like a defensive puzzle. Narrow stairs, sudden angles, doorways small enough that you half duck without thinking, and every turn creates another place for drafts to gather speed. You notice how the air moves, snaking through cracks, pooling in corners, rushing down stairwells like invisible water. In a modern building, you expect rooms to be sealed. Here, the castle is porous by necessity. You peek into a side chamber. It is empty except for a chest and a straw pallet in the corner. The room is so cold you feel it in your teeth. There is a small window slit high on the wall. It looks too tiny to matter, but it matters a lot. Glass is rare and expensive. Even if there is glass, it is thin, uneven, and mounted in lead cames that never fully seal. In many castles, windows are simply shuttered openings with oiled cloth or parchment stretched across them. The cold slides through anyway. You imagine a winter storm outside, wind forcing itself through any gap it can find, the way a cat squeezes into a space you'd swear was too small. You walk on, passing a doorway hung with a heavy wool curtain. You push it aside and feel another shift. The room beyond is warmer, not because it has more fire, but because it is smaller, lower, and tucked into the castle's inner mass. The deeper you go into the stone, the steadier the temperature becomes. Not warm, just less brutal. Castle builders knew this in their bones. That's why the most important private rooms, like bedchambers and the solar, are often located away from exterior walls if possible, or on upper floors where damp is less of an issue. The architecture is a kind of winter map, even if nobody calls it that. The floor beneath you is uneven. It's not the polished marble fantasy some people have. It's stone flags, sometimes packed earth, sometimes wooden planks laid over beams. Stone floors are like ice sheets, and your feet know it. In some castles, people laid wooden boards or thick mats during winter to keep toes alive, but it's a constant battle because moisture creeps up from the ground. Castles are often built on exposed hills or rocky outcrops, places chosen for visibility and defense, not shelter. Wind hits them from all sides. Rain soaks into mortar. Fog clings to the lower levels. When that moisture freezes, it doesn't just make the floor cold, it makes the whole air feel raw. You climb a spiral stair, and the draft changes direction. It's colder on the way up. You've heard that heat rises. And it does, but only the heat that's actually indoors. The upper levels can be worse if they're close to the roof and exposed to winter air. You reach a landing and touch a wooden door. The wood is stiff with cold, swollen in places from damp. Iron hinges groan softly. The sound feels sleepy and ancient, like the castle complaining with you. You step into an outer gallery that runs along the wall. Arrow slits line one side, each one a narrow funnel of winter air. These openings are angled for archers, so they widen inward. Great for shooting, great for collecting drafts. The stone around each slit feels wet, even if it isn't dripping. Condensation forms where warm air from the interior meets freezing stone. Over a season, that dampness can mean mildew on tapestries, rotting wood, rheumy eyes, and a constant smell of cold moss. You sniff and yes, there it is. That faint, green, earthy, damp smell, like a cellar that never dries. Here's a quirky tidbit you might not expect. Some castles used linen or wool, window socks in winter, basically stuffed fabric rolls or hanging cloth that you push into gaps around shutters. It's not sophisticated, but it's insulation in its simplest form. In a few places, people even smeared animal fat into cracks to slow the wind. Imagine doing that every autumn, hands greasy, nose running, just to stop your bed from feeling like it's outdoors. You follow the gallery into a corner tower. Towers are dramatic, yes, but they are also among the coldest spaces in a castle. They have lots of exterior surface area, narrow stairs that act like chimneys for drafts, and rooms that often have windows on multiple sides. In summer, they catch breezes. In winter, they catch everything else. You stand by a window slit and look out. The landscape is a silver-black sweep of frost. The fields below are hard and quiet. If you listen, you can hear almost nothing. Winter kills sound as much as it kills flowers. Back inside, you notice another design detail. The doorways are low and narrow, and many have deep thresholds. Some of that is structural, some defensive, but it also helps in winter. Smaller openings mean less air exchange. A big, open archway bleeds heat. A tight door holds it longer. The castle is full of compromises like that, half accidental, half intentional. In the Great Hall, a fire can't conquer the space. But in these smaller rooms, a brazier or a little hearth might actually matter. You find one, A shallow iron bowl on legs, ashes grey at the bottom. It's cold now, but you picture it glowing at night, casting soft heat on a circle of people huddled close. The trouble is smoke. Even with chimneys, even with vents, smoke hangs in low rooms. It makes eyes sting and lungs ache, but people accept it because the alternative is worse. Historians still debate how much medieval people perceived this cold as hardship versus normal background of life. Some argue that constant exposure built a tolerance we don't have. Others point to letters and household accounts that complain about freezing halls and the expense of fuel, suggesting people hated it just as much as you do right now. Standing here, you feel the truth in both. Your body is already adapting a little, but your mind keeps wishing for a radiator that doesn't exist. You keep wandering, learning the castle by touch and breath. You brush past a tapestry covering an exterior wall. The fabric is thick and slightly dusty. Behind it, the stone is colder. That tells you why tapestries are everywhere in winter, not only for status or storytelling, but because even a layer of wool creates a tiny thermal buffer. In some castles, they line walls with wood paneling too, leaving an air gap behind. That air gap becomes a shy little pocket of warmth. Primitive insulation, but real. You head back down toward the heart of the building, and the air softens again by degrees. It's still cold, but less wet, less sharp. The castle doesn't have one temperature. It's a patchwork of microclimates, each shaped by wall thickness, wind exposure, floor level, and how many bodies are breathing inside. You start to understand the daily winter choreography that everyone here performs. You pick rooms like you pick clothing. You avoid towers at night. You cluster in interiors. You move through corridors quickly. The building teaches you how to live in it. When you finally return toward the hall, you feel grateful for that smoky pocket of warmth, like it's a friend. You step through the curtain, and the firelight strokes your face again. Your cheeks thaw a little. The cough of the hall, the smell of stew, the murmured talk, all of it feels more precious now that you've tasted the rest of the castle. And you realize something else. The cold isn't just weather here. It is a constant actor in every decision, every design, every social rule. Stone walls keep enemies out, sure, but in winter, they also keep people negotiating with their own home. You sit down on a bench near the edge of the warmth, closer than before. You've learned the castle's damp reality, and you've survived your first walk through its frozen veins. You drift back toward the hearth like a moth that knows exactly where the light is safest. The great hall is warmer than any corridor you've just sampled, but it's still a kind of polite illusion. The fire is doing its best, and you can respect that, but the cold is bigger than one blazing throat of flame. It creeps along the flagstones, sits on the benches, and hangs in the air where nobody is breathing. Still, this hearth is the castle's heartbeat. Everything winter-related seems to orbit it. You slide into a place near the edge of the warmth. Not the best place, of course, because those are already occupied by people who don't need to ask twice. A couple of older retainers lean close to the fire, with the calm entitlement of men who have survived many winters here. A lady in a heavy gown sits nearer than you, her feet on a small stool, her hands hidden in a fur muff. A boy is sprawled on the floor almost too close, his cheeks pink, his eyes half shut, lulled by the crackle. You feel jealous of him for a second, then remember you're an adult and jealousy is a waste of calories. The hearth itself is huge, a wide stone mouth that could swallow you if it wanted. The fire burns on a central slab, and the smoke climbs into a hooded chimney above. You can see how this design has evolved. Early medieval halls often had fires in the middle of the room, smoke finding its way out through a gap in the roof. By the later Middle Ages, builders add proper fireplaces and chimneys, so smoke is more controlled and fire can be tucked into a wall. Castle halls are still big, still drafty, but this is at least a step toward comfort. The records from this period make it clear that the hearth is not a decoration. It is the only thing between a living body and a long, slow freezing. You watch servants tend it with the kind of attention you'd give a sleeping baby. They poke, rearrange, feed logs in at angles that keep airflow right. A careless fire means everything from a cold night to a panic about sparks hitting roof beams. The wood is thick, partly seasoned, partly stubbornly green. It hisses now and then. A faint tang of resin rises when a knot catches. Your skin soaks heat from the front, while your back remains a little insulted by the cold behind. You shift and turn like a rotisserie chicken. People here do this all winter without thinking. The hall is also a place of stories, A man near the fire is talking softly to a circle of listeners. Not preaching, not performing, just passing time. When your ears catch the rhythm, you realize he's describing a winter siege from years ago. The detail that makes everyone lean in is not the arrows or the bravery. It's how they kept the fires going when supplies ran low. How they ripped old furniture for fuel, burned bundles of damp brush out of desperation, and kept watch so nobody stole from the pile. Fire is a military asset in winter. Warmth is security. You glance at the stack of wood along one wall. It isn't as tall as you'd hope. Even in a rich castle, fuel goes fast. A big hall like this eats wood the way a hungry animal eats meat. You do quick mental math and stop because it's depressing. This is why winter in castles can still feel like camping in a ruin. There's never enough heat for the size of the place. So the hearth becomes a social magnet and a political stage at the same time. The closer you are to it, the closer you are to the Lord. The closer you are to the Lord, the better your chances of not spending the night shivering in some drafty corner. A servant passes with a basket of embers in an iron pan. He pauses by the hearth, scoops a few glowing coals, and then keeps going, likely to warm a smaller room somewhere deeper in the building. You follow him with your eyes and understand another layer of the system. One fire feeds others. The main hearth is the sun, and every brazier and chamber pot of coals in this castle is like a smaller planet borrowing light. You think of all the hands involved in that chain. Chopping fuel outside in numb air, carrying it in, feeding it, cleaning ash, watching for sparks. Winter creates work that never ends. There's a smell you hadn't noticed before, because your nose was too busy reacting to cold and smoke. It's the smell of people drying out, wool warmed by bodies, leather softened by heat, bread crust going crisp near the flames. Even a faint, sour note of damp cloaks steaming slowly. The hearth is a laundry line as much as a heater. Boots line up on a wooden rack. A pair of gloves, stiff with frost, hang from a peg, slowly relaxing as warmth reaches them. The place feels alive because the fire makes small domestic miracles happen. There's also the constant risk that comes with this reliance. If you take a step back and look at the ceiling beams, you see how close everything is. Thatch is less common in major castles by this period. Roofs are usually slate or tile, but interiors still use lots of wood. The castle is basically a stone shell with a wooden skeleton. Too much heat in the wrong place can mean disaster. Fire is friend and predator. The people tending it know that. Their calm isn't laziness, it's experience. You inch closer, and a little wave of heat washes over your face. Your eyelashes feel soft again. You hold your hands out, palms open, and your skin prickles, half soothed, half shocked by the contrast. You think about the physics of it in a sleepy way. Radiation from the flame hits you directly. Convection moves warm air up and away. That's why your face feels nice, but your knees still complain. The floor is pulling heat from you because stone is a thief. You stretch your feet forward, almost into the ash, because everyone does that. You are learning without being taught. A small dog wanders right up to the edge of the hearth and curls into a ball as if it owns the world. Nobody shoos it. Animals are allowed privileges in winter that they might not get in summer. Heat is scarce, so even a dog has a claim. You find that weirdly comforting. There's a trick in use here that you spot after a few minutes. A servant drapes a wooden screen across part of the hearth's mouth. It isn't to block heat, it's to shape it. Screen panels, sometimes called fireboards, help reflect warmth into the room and reduce sparks. In some castles, you see carved wooden mantles above fireboxes, not just for grandeur, but to direct airflow and push smoke toward the flue. It's medieval climate control, slow and manual, but not thoughtless. People are always tweaking their environment, even if they don't have thermostats. You notice another detail along the walls. High up near the roofline, a louvered opening lets smoke out, and probably lets cold in too. That design choice is a constant compromise. If you close the hall too tightly, smoke thickens and people cough. If you open it too much, heat escapes, and your feet feel like stones. In winter, the castle breathes through these openings, and everyone lives inside that breath. A story passes quietly from one group to another about a lord in a neighboring region who tried to keep his hall warmer by sealing vents too tightly. He nearly smoked his household into misery, and the tapestries turned black within a season. The tale is told with a little chuckle, but it's also a warning. You can't beat the laws of air just by wanting to. Here's another little aside from the world's stranger corners. Some households burned aromatic herbs and pine needles in winter hearths, not only for scent but because they believed certain smoke could ward off illness. Rosemary, juniper, even bits of dried citrus peel when they could get it. It might sound like medieval essential oil culture, and sometimes it really is, but the scent also makes the hall feel less like a damp barn. When the air smells good, you think you're warmer. The mind helps the body in small ways. And there's a bigger question behind all this that people in your time still wrangle over. Some scholars point out that castles could have been built with more efficient heating layouts, more chimneys, smaller halls, tighter windows. So why weren't they, at least in the richest places? One line of thought says defense and symbolism always won. People preferred a majestic cold hall to a cozy cramped one because power needed to look big. Another view suggests fuel constraints made better systems pointless. Why build dozens of fireplaces if you can't feed them? Standing here, watching a single hearth struggle to warm huge air, you can see how both ideas might fit. The castle is a statement. The winter is a reality check. You settle deeper into the rhythm of this place. The fire pops. Someone laughs softly. A spoon scrapes a wooden bowl. You feel your shoulders drop for the first time tonight. This hearth is not enough to make you truly warm, but it is enough to make you human again. It gives you a center, a place to gather your thoughts, a place your body can believe in. And as the evening thickens, you realize why one fireplace is never enough. It's not just because castles are big, it's because life here is distributed. People sleep in chambers, work in kitchens, keep watch in towers, pray in chapels, nurse babies in small rooms. Every one of those spaces wants heat, and every one of those spaces is competing for embers from this main heart. Winter makes the hearth a busy monarch. It rules by necessity. You lean forward one more time, letting heat bloom across your palms, and your eyelids feel heavier with each breath. You are still cold in some places, but you are no longer lost in the cold. You have found the castle's pulse. Soon enough, you'll follow that pulse into other rooms, other strategies, other stubborn little inventions for comfort. For now, you sit by the fire, listening to it work, as if it is telling you a slow, patient secret about survival. You stay a while longer by the hall fire, but the longer you watch it, the more you notice the quiet truth behind every flame. Heat is never free here. Every log you see burning had to be found, cut, hauled, dried, guarded, and then finally sacrificed to this hungry mouth of stone. Winter turns fuel into the castle's real treasure, the thing that quietly decides how comfortable or miserable everyone will be. So you follow that truth outward. Early the next morning, before the sun has properly lifted its head, you walk with a small group heading through the inner gate. The air bites harder at dawn. It feels sharper, as if the night has concentrated all its cold into a final insult. The men and women around you are wrapped in layers that look heavy enough to count as bedding. They carry axes, ropes, and a sort of resigned focus. If you're picturing a cozy fireplace scene, this is the ugly backstage that makes it possible. You trudge across rutted ground toward the woodlot that belongs to the lord. One thing the account rolls of many castles show plainly is that fuel supply was organized like any other resource. Lords claimed rights to nearby forests, and peasants owed labor or fees connected to gathering wood. Not every castle sat beside a lush woodland. Some were perched on bare hills, meaning fuel had to be carted in from miles away. Either way, winter made timber a kind of currency. The warmer the hall, the more political power you could afford to burn. The trees are leafless, all black fingers against the sky. The ground is stiff with frost. When the first axe strikes a trunk, the sound is dry and clean, a hard knock that echoes through bare branches. You catch the smell of sap even in winter, faint but sweet. The rhythm of chopping settles into the air. Thud, pause, crack, thud. It's not fast work. Wood doesn't give up without argument, and cold makes muscles slow. You can feel the strain just watching shoulders rise and fall. Behind you, a cart creaks, already loaded with smaller branches and brush. That stuff burns quickly. Not the best for a long night, but it's still warmth. Nothing is wasted in January. Even twigs become time by the fire. A small argument breaks out between two men over which section of the woodlot they're allowed to cut. It isn't dramatic, but the edge in their voices tells you it matters. Fuel is tied to rights. Rights are tied to hierarchy. In some regions, forests were legally protected by the lord, meaning commoners could only gather deadfall or pay to cut living trees. In other places, villagers had customary access, But those customs were constantly being tested. Winter makes every rule feel personal. You walk a little farther and see piles of peat stacked like black bricks. Not every castle relied only on wood. Where forests were scarce or wetlands nearby, peat was a winter lifeline. It burns slower than brush and can smolder for hours, but it smokes more and smells sharp, earthy, almost medicinal. Peat was often cut in summer, dried, then stored for winter. You pick one up. It's lighter than you expect, like compressed soil, and you can see ancient plant fibers in it. It's a reminder that heat here comes from landscapes, not from pipes. There's another fuel pile too. Charcoal, dark and brittle, made by burning wood slowly in covered pits. Charcoal burns hotter and cleaner than raw wood, so it's prized for smithing and for wealthier households. But turning wood into charcoal costs time and resources. It's like upgrading your fuel, and not everyone gets that upgrade. A woman nearby is bundling dried dung into flat cakes. You hesitate, then realize how normal this is. Animal dung, when dried, burns. It isn't glamorous, but it's practical in places where wood is precious. The smell when it burns is not a dream, but in a freezing winter, you learn to care less about romance and more about survival. In parts of Europe, and across much of the medieval world beyond it, dung fuel was common for the poor and for cooks who needed steady heat. Now your modern brain might be whispering, surely they wouldn't burn that inside a fancy castle. But low-grade fuels often ended up in servant quarters, kitchens, or guard rooms, while the hall saved good wood for visibility and status. That split tells you another truth. Heat is social. You can read class differences in the way a room smells. The work stretches through the morning. Logs are trimmed, stacked, and hauled toward the castle. You help once, just to feel it. The wood is rough and cold in your gloves, and when you lift it, your muscles complain at the weight and the awkwardness. You understand why fuel was a major expense in castle budgets, right up there with food and wages. A winter that runs long could quietly bankrupt a household. Back in the courtyard, piles of wood are arranged carefully under lean-to roofs. If you stack it wrong, it stays wet. If it stays wet, it smokes and wastes heat. A steward checks the pile like he's inspecting soldiers. He doesn't have to say anything for you to sense this is serious business. A well-run fuel store is the difference between a warm winter and a miserable one. Here's a strange little note from the margins of history. Some castles kept holy logs for winter feasts, big ceremonial chunks of wood chosen for the Christmas fire or midwinter celebrations. They were believed to bring luck and protection. In a few places, people saved a fragment of the previous year's log to light the next, a kind of winter continuity ritual. Is it practical? Not really. Is it deeply human? Absolutely. When the cold is scary, you give your fire a story. Fuel also comes with politics beyond the woods. If you're in a castle during wartime, one of the first things a besieging army will try to do is cut off access to forests and fields. Warmth becomes a defensive resource. A winter siege is not only a fight for walls, it's a fight for fires. People knew this so well that some castles stockpiled fuel the way they stockpiled grain. Still, supply could run out, and then choices got ugly. Do you burn spare furniture? Do you tear down wooden outbuildings? Do you ration fire to only the hall and chapel? The cold forces decisions nobody wants to make. You notice how the best logs are reserved. Straight, thick pieces, dried for months. Those go to the hall and the lord's chambers. The gnarlier, damper scraps go to workrooms. There is a ranking system even inside the woodpile. As afternoon comes on, the carts roll through the gatehouse, wheels squealing, horses steaming. The smell of fresh cut wood follows them, bright and almost cheerful in the icy air. You feel a flicker of relief, the same relief you'd feel if someone showed up with groceries before a snowstorm. Winter turns fuel deliveries into emotional events. While the carts unload, you hear a clerk murmuring numbers to himself. He's counting, noting, tracking. Castles ran on ledgers. In many households, fuel rations were recorded carefully. It was common to assign certain amounts of firewood per room or per person, especially in big noble estates. The steward's job was not just to keep everyone warm, but to keep the budget alive. Fire management was finance management. And this ties into a bigger unresolved question among experts. Some argue that fuel scarcity was the main reason castles stayed cold, that even wealthy lords could not gather enough wood to warm vast stone structures fully. Others suggest that resources were available, but priorities leaned toward display and defense instead of comfort. So heat was concentrated in symbolic spaces rather than spread evenly. The evidence points both ways. Some accounts list huge wood consumption, others show strict rationing. Standing by these piles, watching people treat each log like it matters, you feel the weight of that uncertainty. You can't warm 100 rooms with one forest forever. Even the weather itself can reshape everything. A mild winter might let stores last. A harsh one might drain them early. If snow blocks roads, carts can't arrive. If rain soaks the woodlot during cutting season, the next winter's supply smokes uselessly. The castle is always one bad season away from shivering. As dusk returns, you follow a servant carrying an armload of the day's best logs toward the hall. You can feel the difference in weight and dryness compared to the twiggy bundles you saw earlier. These are the kind of logs that burn slow and steady, putting out warmth you can trust. When they hit the hearth, sparks jump like tiny fireworks. The smell of good wood fills the hall, and for a moment, you understand why people could grow almost sentimental about fuel. It is comfort in physical form. You settle again near the fire, thinking about the day's labor, the politics in the forest, the smells of peat and dung and fresh timber. The hearth is still hungry, still needing constant feeding, but now you know what each feeding costs. Winter warmth is not a background feature of castle life. It is the product of a whole chain of people, landscapes, and power structures working in the cold. You hold your hands out as the new logs catch, and the heat feels different somehow, more earned. The flames aren't just pretty now. They carry the echo of axes, the creak of carts, the quiet tension over rights to trees. You let that knowledge settle into you, slow and sleepy, the way a good fire settles into embers. You wake in the night to the sound of the fire shifting, not crackling loudly, just a soft collapse as a log turns and settles. For a moment you don't know where you are. Then the smell brings you back. Smoke, not the sweet campfire smoke of a weekend trip, but the thick, lived-in kind that coats everything. It's in your hair, your cloak, probably your eyelashes. You lift your head and feel your nose complain, like it's already tired of winter. When morning comes, you sit up near the embers and finally let yourself notice what your body has been politely ignoring. The air in the great hall tastes like yesterday's fire, and the day before that, and the week before that. Warmth here arrives with a price, and the price is smoke. You step closer to the hearth and watch how it breathes. The flames pull air in low, then push smoke upward toward the hooded chimney. It works most of the time, but there's always a stubborn haze. When a log is damp, the smoke thickens. When wind changes direction, it downdrafts. When the hall doors open a lot, the airflow shifts and the chimney sulks. Your eyes sting faintly even when things are going well. People blink more than you'd expect. They rub at their lids without thinking. It's the small, constant tax of survival. The first thing you learn is that medieval people were not sitting around in a crystal-clear living room with one tasteful fireplace. Even in well-built castles with chimneys, smoke was part of indoor life, because fires were open and ventilation was imperfect. The best evidence from buildings and household accounts shows that halls and kitchens regularly filled with smoke when the weather was bad or fuel was poor. You can see it in the blackened stone above the hearth. You can smell it in every beam. It's not a theory, it's your morning breath. You wander to the side of the hall where light slips in through a high-slit window. In the angled sunbeam you can see the smoke floating as tiny particles. It makes the air look alive, glittering a little, almost pretty until you inhale, and your throat turns dry. You cough once, softly, and you notice nobody reacts. That's the scary part. Coughing is normal here, like clearing your throat in a cold season. For you, it feels like a warning. For them, it's Tuesday. The kitchen is worse. You step in, and the smoke wraps around you like an old blanket you didn't ask for. The hearths are bigger, the fire's more constant, and the cooking requires heat that doesn't stop just because your lungs are tired. Pots hang over flames. Spits turn slowly with meat. Bakers open ovens that puff smoke into the room. The ceiling is so dark it looks painted. The cook's hair is tied up under a linen cap, but even the cap has a grey tint. You notice her eyes. They are watery, not from sadness but from years of smoke. A washerwoman stirs a kettle, face flushed from heat, but she is still coughing, a small, harsh rattle that disappears into the room. This is how winter kitchens feel. Warm in a punishing way, smoky in a clinging way. You might think you'd trade anything for heat when you're cold. Then you stand here and realize heat without clean air is a different kind of hardship. There's another scent in the smoke too. Grease, tallow candles, burned fat from cooking. When you're used to modern exhaust fans, this mixture feels heavy. It sticks to your tongue. It settles in your clothes. It makes the hall feel like a slow, simmering stew of humans and fuel. You start noticing the ways people try to manage it. A servant opens a shutter a hand's width, then closes it halfway again. A boy waves a rush bundle near the hearth to coax the smoke toward the flue. Someone uses a long paddle to shift logs so they burn cleaner. These are small things, but they show a daily skill. Smoke control is a craft. People learn to read the fire like you read weather, watching the color of flame, the way it pulls, the way it licks the air. A good fire means less smoke and more warmth. A bad one makes everyone miserable. In the Lord's chamber, you see a different tactic. The fireplace is smaller, better drafted. The chimney seems straighter. There is even a little stone ledge, designed to carry the air upward. The room smells of wood and wax instead of pure smoke. You can feel the privilege in your lungs. Better air is another layer of comfort, just like closeness to heat. You think about how castles were built and rebuilt. Chimneys became more common in elite spaces from the 12th century onward, and by the late medieval period, many private rooms had their own fireplaces. That development was partly about warmth, yes, but also about smoke. The goal wasn't to create a cozy, modern interior. It was to keep the worst of the haze away from the people who mattered most. You don't need a historian to tell you that. Your eyes already can. And yet, even with chimneys, smoke never fully leaves. Some castles used chimneys that were shared between rooms. Some had flues that zigzagged through thick walls, losing draft. Some had chimneys that were blocked by nests or soot. When that happened, smoke found the easiest exit, which was usually straight into the hall. You can picture a winter evening where people sit close to the fire, half warming, half squinting through tears, and thinking this is simply how life is. There's a slightly strange habit you notice among a few older men. They chew on something dark and resinous. You ask, in your clumsy way, and get a shrug of explanation. It's pine resin mixed with herbs, chewed to soothe a cough or clear the throat. The taste is bitter and sharp, but they swear by it. Whether it worked or not, it gives you a glimpse into the small homemade responses people had to smoky air. They didn't have inhalers. They had gum-like resins, warm ale, and stubbornness. Another winter detail sits near the hearth, a pile of dried orange peels and juniper twigs. Someone tosses them into the flames now and then. The smell sweetens briefly, lifting the mood. It's partly comfort, partly belief. Some people think aromatic smoke can chase away sickness, or at least the bad humors thought to drift in winter air. Even if that's not medically correct, scent does something real to your brain. It makes the hall feel fresher for a moment. You feel a lift too. Your shoulders loosen. Your breathing slows. The mind can be a gentle accomplice when your body is struggling. Of course, there's a darker side. Smoke irritates, yes, but deep winter smoke can be dangerous. If a chimney backdrafts overnight in a closed room, people can sicken or even die quietly. It doesn't happen every day, but the possibility sits there like a shadow. Fires are watched constantly for that reason. The castle never truly sleeps, because the hearth can't be left alone. You look at the children playing near the edge of the hall, faces smudged, hair smelling of ash. You wonder what it does to young lungs over years. Modern science would say it's rough. Chronic smoke exposure leads to breathing problems, eye issues, and higher infection risk. Medieval people didn't have that vocabulary, but they had the experience. They knew winter coughing was common. They knew old servants often wheezed. They knew eyes went cloudy earlier than they should. They accepted it because the alternative was freezing. There is still disagreement among researchers about exactly how much indoor smoke varied by region and by class. Some argue that elite castles with better chimneys and high-quality fuel had relatively manageable air for their upper rooms. Others point to soot layers and written complaints, suggesting that even the wealthy lived in a haze much of the year. Both sides have evidence. As you sit here blinking at the drifting particles, you believe the middle ground. Maybe the Lord's air was better, but no one escaped smoke entirely. Winter didn't allow that luxury. You finally notice your own cloak. It's starting to smell like this place. Not unpleasant, just deeply marked. You think about traveling later, stepping into another town, another hall, carrying the castle's smoke on you like a badge. In the medieval world, you could smell where someone had been. A household with peat fires smells different from one with oak. A kitchen heavy on tallow smells different from one using more beeswax. Smoke is identity. By evening, the hall is full again. Fires burn brighter as the cold outside thickens. The haze deepens, then thins as draft improves. then deepens again when someone pushes in a damp log. It never settles into perfect balance. It keeps moving, like a living thing. People keep talking, eating, laughing softly. Their eyes water. They wipe them. They keep going. You sit near the hearth and let the smoke blur the shadows at the edge of vision. The warmth on your palms is real. The sting in your eyes is real too. Winter comfort here is always double-edged. It warms you while it wears you down. The castle offers you fire, but it asks for your lungs in return. And you, like everyone else in this hall, accept the trade because it's the only one on the table. You spend the smoky evening turning slowly like a spit roast, warming one side, then the other, learning to live in the fire's uneven generosity. But even the best hearth can't follow you everywhere. At some point you have to step back into the corridors, into chambers where the breath of winter has more authority than flame. And that's when you understand the next truth of castle life. If you can't change the building, you change yourself. You wear winter. In the morning, a maid leads you to a chest, where clothing is kept for guests and household members. The lid creaks open, and the smell that rises is thick wool, old linen, and a faint trace of smoke that never really leaves. You run your fingers over the fabrics and realize that medieval winter clothing is not about looking sharp for a portrait. It's about carrying your own climate with you. You start with the base layer. Linen, soft from washing, thin but important. It wicks sweat. And yes, you will sweat even in winter if you're moving or sitting too close to the fire. Damp skin is dangerous here. The first rule of cold survival is staying as dry as you can. Over the linen goes the wool. Not one wool garment, but several. A tunic, a surcoat, maybe an extra sleeved layer. Wool is winter magic. It traps air in its fibers, and trapped air is warmth. Wool also stays insulating even when a bit damp, which makes it your best friend in a castle that never fully dries out. A household wardrobe list from the period makes a practical point without trying to be poetic. Winter allowances include more wool, heavier weaves, and sometimes extra garments specifically labeled for cold months. The people who could afford it stocked winter gear like you stock batteries before a storm. Those who couldn't made do with whatever they had, patching and layering until the fabric was more repair than cloth. You can feel why. You put on a thick wool tunic, and instantly the air seems less hostile. Not warm, but less biting. Your body relaxes a notch, as if you've just shut a door against the cold. Then comes the outer layer. A cloak, heavy and long, fastened with a brooch that feels like a small piece of armor. Cloaks are not just fashion, they are mobile walls. They block drafts, hold heat, and can be wrapped around your head if your ears start screaming. Some cloaks are lined with fur or have fur collars. Fur is not universal, but in castles, you see it on people with money. Squirrel, rabbit, fox, even ermine for the very fancy. The fur traps even more air, and the smooth hairs shed moisture. It is expensive for a reason. It works. You notice how the garments are designed to keep warmth close. Sleeves are tight at the wrist. Necklines can be closed high. Hoods are common. When wind slips in at your collar, it feels like a knife. Medieval people know that, and so their winter clothes are full of choke points you can cinch. Belts draw cloth in so it doesn't flap and spill heat. Laces, close gaps. It's a world where a loose neckline is not just a style choice. It's a risk. On your feet you wear hose, woolen, sometimes doubled. Over that, leather shoes or boots. The problem is, leather gets stiff in cold and soaks up damp, so people grease it. Animal fat, oils, anything to make it water resistant. In winter, footwear is survival equipment. Your toes are always the first to complain, then your fingers, then your pride. You pull on gloves, not the sleek kind you buy in a store, but mitts, thick and blunt. Fingers together keep each other warm. You flex them and feel clumsy, but you also feel safer. The servants wear simpler versions, often patched. The lord's family wears finer gloves lined with fur. Again, warmth follows power. There's a habit that becomes obvious as you watch people dress. Nobody puts on one layer and stops. They keep adding until movement starts to feel slightly restricted. You might think that's uncomfortable, but it's strategic. In a cold castle, being a little overdressed gives you time. Time to cross a corridor without freezing. Time to sit in a chilly chamber before embers arrive. Time to work outdoors and come back not entirely wrecked. Clothing here is not a static choice. It's a heat budget. You walk through the hall and see people adjusting constantly. A hood goes up when a door opens. A cloak tightens when someone steps into shadow. A belt loosens when they sit close to the fire. It's this quiet, continuous tuning of the body to the environment, like sailing, but with wool. Here's a detail from the edge of the record that makes you blink. In some places, people stuffed extra cloth or even dried grass into their hose for insulation, basically medieval thermal socks. It sounds ridiculous until your toes go numb and you start eyeing the straw floor with new respect. Practical improvisation doesn't need to be elegant. You also spot a few people wearing something that looks like a quilted jacket under their tunic. That's a gambeson, commonly used as armor padding. But in winter, it doubles as a superb insulator. Layers of linen or wool stitched together trap air in a way that feels almost modern. Some people, especially guards or travelers, might wear a lighter gambeson all winter, even when not expecting a fight. You can't help admiring that kind of cross-purpose brilliance. If you already own something warm enough to stop a sword bruise, it's probably warm enough to stop a draft. You wander into a small workroom where women are spinning and sewing. The air is cold, but their hands move steadily. They're making more of what you're wearing. Cloth is a winter supply chain too. Spinning, weaving, fulling wool to thicken it, then cutting and stitching layers. Winter clothes don't appear by magic. They appear because someone sat in a cold room and made them. You can follow the line from sheep on a hillside to a cloak on your shoulders. The labor is almost invisible in the hall, but it is the reason the hall can function at all. You remember that in some regions people used felted wool hats as another defense. Felt is dense, wind-resistant, and it keeps the head warm, which matters because a lot of body heat escapes there. A hat is like closing a chimney on your own body. You put one on and instantly the cold feels less clever. The castle's inner life keeps showing you this theme. Heat is patchy, so your clothing becomes your personal hearth. You carry your own warmth the way you carry your name. It's also a marker of status, of course. You look at a steward passing by in a mantle dyed a deep, rich color. Dyed cloth is expensive. It signals wealth, but it also often signals better fabric, thicker wool, more layers. In winter, luxury and comfort overlap. A poor servant might be wrapped in multiple thin, worn pieces that still let wind through. A noble might wear fewer layers, but each one is dense, lined, and tailored to seal gaps. The cold doesn't care about your title, but your title decides how well you can answer it. There's another unresolved question that sits under all this, one people still bat around in modern writing. How common were fur linings and truly heavy winter garments for ordinary castle workers? Some accounts suggest fur was mostly elite, while servants relied on plain wool. Other evidence from inventories and art implies broader use, at least among skilled household staff. Watching the range around you, you suspect both are true, depending on place and time. A stable boy might never touch fur. A cook employed for decades might earn a fur-lined hood as part of her winter kit. The castle is a small society, and clothing is one of its quiet negotiations. You step outside the hall for a while, testing your layers. The courtyard is frozen, wind slipping through the gatehouse. You feel the cold, but now it takes longer to reach your bones. The wool buffers it. Your cloak blocks the worst of the draft. Your hood keeps your ears from turning into pure pain. You realize that people survived castle winters, not because the buildings were warm, but because they wore their warmth like armor. Not shiny armor, just soft, stubborn insulation. Back inside, you sit near the fire again, but now you notice something else. People don't strip layers when they reach heat. They peel only a little, letting their bodies decide. Because leaving the hall means stepping back into cold territory, and you want to be ready. So even next to the hearth, you're wrapped up. That's why medieval interiors can look so bundled in paintings. It's not just fashion, it's temperature discipline. The day rolls on, and you feel yourself growing used to the weight of cloth. The cloak stops feeling like a burden and starts feeling like security. You catch the smell of wool warmed by the fire, a homely animal scent, and it becomes part of your mental picture of winter comfort. The castle is still drafty, the air is still cool on your nose, but your body is no longer fighting naked against it. You lift your hands toward the flames, sleeves thick at your wrists, and you think about how small this victory is. It doesn't conquer winter. It just gives you a fighting chance to move through it without shrinking. In a world without central heating, clothing is your portable house. It's your first line of defense, your daily habit, your quiet technology. And as the fire murmurs beside you, you settle deeper into your layers, feeling the castle's cold press at the edges and your own warmth press back, inch by inch, breath by breath. You think you've learned the main lesson already. Fire here is precious. Clothes are your armor. But winter waits until night to teach its deeper curriculum. Night is when the cold feels less like weather and more like a personality. It sneaks into your thoughts, into your bones, and it makes you understand why medieval people treated beds not as simple furniture, but as little fortified worlds. After supper, the hall thins out. Some people linger near the hearth, chasing the last good heat before they have to face their own rooms. You follow a servant carrying a lantern, the flame inside it wobbling gently as if it's also sleepy. The corridor is darker now, colder by a quiet margin. Your cloak brushes the wall, and you can feel the stones chill through the wool. Somewhere above, a door closes, then another. The castle is folding itself inward for the night. Your sleeping place is a small chamber, often in a passage. The servant pushes open the door, and a wave of cold air greets you like a rude relative. The room is not freezing in the open-air sense. It is colder than that. It feels stored, the kind of cold that has been waiting since morning, patient and smug. There is a fireplace in the wall, but it holds only ash. A little brazier sits near the hearthstone, empty for now. The room smells faintly of smoke, old straw, and the sharp, clean note of winter air. And then you see the bed. It is not a flimsy frame with a thin mattress. It is a wooden structure that looks like a gazebo built for sleeping. Thick posts rise at the corners, supporting a canopy. Heavy curtains hang on all sides, tied back for now. A tester above creates a roof, and the whole thing feels like a room inside a room. You walk up to it and touch the fabric. It's wool or heavy linen, worn soft, a little dusty. The servant gives you a small, proud nod, like he's showing you the best trick in the castle. And he is. Bed curtains are about privacy, yes, but in winter they are about survival. Curtains trap the air your body warms, keeping it near you instead of letting it drift into the cold room. You don't need modern insulation to understand it. You feel it the moment the servant pulls the curtains partly closed, and the air inside grows less biting. It's a microclimate, a personal cave of warmth. In many parts of medieval Europe, especially among the well-off, beds like this were standard. Household accounts list curtains, hangings, and extra coverings as valuable items, sometimes more expensive than the bed frame itself. That should tell you something. In a castle, a good bed is not luxury fluff. It is a winter machine. The servant sets down a bundle, blankets, a quilted coverlet, maybe a fur throw if you're lucky. The bedding is layered because heat leaks upward too. Straw or feather mattresses sit on a rope lattice that gives a little. The straw smells sweet and dry when it's fresh, and slightly sour when it's old. Either way, it holds air. That air holds warmth. Even the mattress is insulation. You notice a smaller bundle tucked at the edge. It's a linen bag, slightly stained from use. The servant opens it and shows you what's inside. A flat stone, warmed at the hall fire. He wraps it in cloth again and lays it near the foot of the bed. Hot stones are the medieval way of cheating night. Simple, heavy, effective. A warmed stone under your feet turns the first hour of sleep from misery into something almost gentle. In some households, they used metal pans filled with embers and a lid, slid under the bed like a secret sun. It's dangerous if you're careless, but you can see why people took the risk. You sit on the edge of the bed and feel the straw shift. The chamber is still cold, but already you're thinking of the bed as a refuge. It's like stepping into a tent in the snow. Not warm at first, but designed to get warm once you're inside. That design is deliberate. Beds are built to cradle heat more than to show off carpentry. Here's a detail that makes you glance toward the door with a new kind of gratitude. The servant returns with a wooden board and wedges it against the bottom of the door, stuffing cloth around the frame. It's draft blocking. People did this routinely at night, because even a faint air current can strip warmth from a bed. If you keep the room still, your curtains work better. It's an ecosystem of small fixes. You also see how the bed is positioned. It's not right against an exterior wall, where stone would suck away heat. It's closer to the interior partition, sometimes near a fireplace, even if that fireplace isn't lit all night. In grand rooms, beds were often placed in alcoves or recesses, another way to reduce exposed surface and drafts. When you think of medieval beds as random wooden boxes, you miss the cleverness. They are placed like strategic shelters. The servant lights the brazier and lets it burn for a while to take the edge off the room. The coals glow dull red, giving a whisper of warmth that barely reaches your knees. But a whisper is something. He will likely take the brazier away later to avoid smoke buildup and fire risk. Night heat is always a balancing act between comfort and catastrophe. You wait until he leaves, then begin the ritual every castle sleeper knows by heart. You undress only partly. Keeping on a linen shift or a thin tunic makes sense because bedding takes time to warm. You climb under the covers quickly, as if you're diving beneath water. Cold air snaps at any exposed skin. Then you pull the blankets up, and the curtains around you close like theatre drapes. The change is immediate. Not warmth, exactly, but containment. Your breath stays near your face instead of vanishing into the room. The chilly pressure on your cheeks softens. Your body begins to heat the space around you. Little by little, you can feel it like a faint tide rising. In a large hall, your heat is nothing. In this curtained box, your heat matters. You listen to the sounds of the castle settling, footsteps fading, a cough somewhere down the corridor, the muffled clank of a guard's spear as he shifts, the wind outside rubbing the shutters. Inside your bed, those sounds are distant. The curtains don't just hold heat, they hold quiet. That quiet makes the cold feel less aggressive. You think about what ordinary people outside the castle do. Many peasants slept in one room with animals close by, relying on shared body heat and low ceilings. Here, in the castle, privacy increases, which means warmth decreases, unless you build solutions. So the bed becomes the substitute for communal heat. The higher your status, the more you sleep alone, and the more your bed has to work for you. It's a strange twist. Comfort requires technology. You touch the blanket. It's heavy. In winter, heaviness is safety. Wool coverlets press down, trapping warm air and stopping drafts from sneaking under edges. Some coverlets are lined with fur. Others are quilted with scraps, making a patchwork that feels almost modern in concept. There are inventories listing multiple winter covers for a single bed, rotated to stay dry and clean. That tells you how much attention went into sleeping warm. Night is the hardest part of winter, and everyone knows it. At the edge of this topic, there's a curious habit reported in some places. People sometimes slept with a small cap on, even under curtains, especially in the coldest months. You try it mentally and nod. Heat escapes from the head. If your head stays warm, the rest of you feels warmer. That's not superstition. It's body physics, discovered by experience. There is also a tension in the scholarship around beds and heating. Some researchers suggest that late medieval elites might have used individual warming devices more often than we once assumed, like bedpans of embers or heated bricks, because evidence shows frequent replacement of such tools. Others argue those items were occasional luxuries, with most people relying mainly on curtains, clothes, and shared blankets. The written record is uneven. Archaeology gives hints. You, inside this curtained world, can imagine both realities depending on household wealth and local fuel supply. A great lord may have a heated stone every night. A lesser knight may have one only in the worst weather. The bed itself is the baseline solution, and everything else is an upgrade. You shift your feet toward the hot stone. The cloth around it is warm, and the warmth spreads along your soles like ink in water. Your calves relax. It's a small miracle. You can see why people went to such trouble to warm beds. It's not about pampering. It's about letting the body unclench enough to sleep. Your breath slows. The air inside your curtains is now better than the air outside, and you can feel that difference clearly. If you dared open the curtains, you'd be slapped by cold again. So you keep them closed, and you start to drift. Before you do, you give a quiet thought to the servants who set this up, to the people who grew the flax, sheared the sheep, spun the yarn, wove the cloth, hauled the straw, warmed the stone. Your comfort is an entire chain of winter labor, just like the fire in the hall. You are not surviving alone. You are surviving through a system. Your eyes grow heavy. The bed holds your warmth, your quiet, your sense of safety. It is a microcastle inside the castle. Outside, the stone chambers remain cold, the corridors still drafty, the towers still exposed. But inside these curtains, in this small woven pocket of air and cloth, you can finally let the cold wait outside while you sleep. Morning comes slowly in a castle. You wake with the strange sensation that the air outside your bed curtains is colder than the night you fell asleep in. The warmth you built up has faded, but inside this little enclosed world, you still feel a hint of last night's comfort. You push the curtain aside a few inches. Immediately a ribbon of icy air slides over your face. It's so sharp you almost pull the curtain shut again on instinct. Instead, you climb out, feet hitting the floor with a flinch. Your breath smokes softly in the quiet chamber. The brazier is gone, the hearth cold, and the room feels like it was waiting to ambush you. But the moment you turn toward the wall opposite the fireplace, you notice something that wasn't obvious in the dimness last night. Tapestries. Heavy ones, hung in long vertical panels across the stone. You step closer, rubbing your hands together as you study them. Don't think of museum tapestries with bright threads and perfect preservation. These are thick wool hangings, worn smooth by years of smoke, fingers, and winter damp. The colors are muted, earth-toned, touched by soot, but the designs still breathe. Hunters in the field, saints in halos, beasts tangled in stylized vines. The images glow softly in morning light. At first they might seem like decoration, but the moment you place your palm against the tapestry's surface, you feel the truth. The fabric is warmer than the stone behind it. Not warm, but less brutal. It softens the cold the way a cloak softens wind. The difference is small but meaningful, a reminder that every scrap of insulation counts. You slip a hand behind the hanging and touch the bare wall. The stone is so cold it almost feels wet, as if the night has condensed into it. Pull your hand back to the tapestry, and the temperature changes enough that your skin relaxes. You nod to yourself. This is not ornamental. This is strategy stitched into art. Records from medieval households show that wall hangings were prized winter goods. They were expensive, labor-intensive, and often handed down like heirlooms not only because they were beautiful, but because they kept families alive on cold nights. Wool is a stubborn, warm-hearted material. It traps pockets of air. It blocks drafts. It stops cold stone from radiating misery into your bones. And you notice something else. The tapestry doesn't hang flush against the wall. It's suspended slightly forward, creating a slim air gap. That tiny space works like a cushion. It slows heat loss, turning the wall from a giant cold radiator into something more bearable. Someone in the castle understood this intuitively long before anyone used the word insulation. As you trace one embroidered border, you catch a small irregularity in the design, a place where the stitching changes direction, thread slightly coarser. The servant who helped you last night explains in a careful gesture that parts of this tapestry have been reworked. Winter doesn't just damage skin, it damages fabric. Cold makes threads brittle, damp makes wool sag, soot clings and dulls edges. But instead of discarding hangings, households mended them season after season. A tapestry is expensive, yes, but it's also essential infrastructure. You walk to the next wall. Another tapestry hangs there. Different theme, same purpose. Birds in trees, all long necks and pointed wings, outlined in faded blues and greens. Someone must have chosen these colors carefully. Even in winter gloom, they look like small windows into warmer seasons. Maybe that wasn't the main reason they were chosen, but it must have helped. A hall filled with images of green forests is a psychological counterweight to snow beyond the walls. The servant gestures for you to follow her into the corridor. As you step out, the difference hits immediately. Draught, darkness, and a bite in the air that wasn't in the chamber. You wrap your cloak tighter and glance at the walls. Bare stone here. No hangings. And suddenly, you feel as if the cold is speaking louder. In wealthier areas of the castle, tapestries and cloth panels line entire stretches of wall. In poorer areas, the stone is naked. The contrast is stark. A few workers have hung rough wool blankets instead. Not beautiful, but functional. One blanket has a stain shaped vaguely like a handprint. Another is patched so many times it looks like a map. This teaches you something that the quieter corners of historical records hint at. Even plain cloth hangings, without elaborate embroidery, were common winter defenses. People used what they had: worn cloaks, leftover wool, layers of linen stitched together. Anything to interrupt the march of cold air down the stone. You duck through a passage leading toward the great hall. The cold eddies around your ankles like a curious animal. But then you reach the hall, and the transformation is unmistakable. The long walls are almost entirely covered in tapestries, big ones, some stretching nearly from floor to upper beams. They are patterned with scenes of battles, saints, gardens, myths. The room feels warmer not because the hearth has grown stronger, but because the walls themselves aren't throwing cold back at you. You walk along one tapestry showing a vineyard, grapes hanging in seasonal promise. The wool is dense, layered, carefully woven. If you lean into it, the surface feels springy, a little scratchy, but comforting. You imagine nights when the hall fire weakens and the wind outside tries to push into every crack. In that moment, These woven panels are the difference between sleeping on a stone that steals your breath and sleeping beside a barrier that loves you enough to hold a little heat. A story comes to mind that a worker mentions with a shrug. In some households, small objects were hidden in folds of wall hangings, not treasures, but herbs, sprigs of dried lavender or rosemary, to sweeten the winter air, a touch of scent against months of cold smoke. It's a small, almost poetic gesture, maybe superstition, maybe comfort, but either way, it makes sense. Winter life rewards any habit that lifts the spirits. You stop and look more closely at the upper edges of the hangings. Wooden rods or iron hooks support them, and even those rods tell a quiet story. If a hanging is lowered an inch or two, cold air shifts. If it's raised, a draft sneaks underneath. Households tune their tapestries like musicians tune strings, adjusting them depending on weather. It's a craft you wouldn't think about until you live here long enough to feel every whisper of wind. There's a debate among researchers about how widespread, large, elaborate tapestries really were. Some argue they were mostly luxuries for the wealthiest courts, rare and extraordinarily costly. Yet others point to surviving wills and inventories from lesser nobility, showing multiple hangings per household, suggesting they were more common than often assumed, though of varying quality. Both viewpoints feel reasonable as you stand here. Some hangings look rich enough to belong to kings. Others look patchworked, practical, made with whatever wool was on hand. The functional truth is undeniable. Covering stone walls works. Every medieval person knew this. It's as essential as cloaks or bed curtains. The castle is still cold, yes, but the hangings dull the edge, turning stone into something less predatory. The hall fills slowly as morning routines begin. Servants move along the walls, smoothing folds, checking pegs, straightening corners. They do it with practiced care. This is part of the daily winter ritual. Straight hangings mean no accidental cold pockets. Wrinkles can trap drafts. Loose corners can flap and break what little barrier exists. They tend these tapestries the way you might tend weather stripping in your home today. The work is different, but the logic is the same. A child brushes her hand along the bottom fringe, then tucks her fingers inside the gap and giggles at the chill behind it. Her mother pulls her hand back quickly and wraps her in a cloak. It's a moment that shows the hidden truth. Behind every tapestry, winter is waiting. The wall never stops being cold. You just choose how much of that cold you let into your life. You find a seat by the tapestry nearest the hearth. You can feel its presence like a soft shoulder against the room's chill. It doesn't make the hall warm. Nothing truly does. But it makes the hall survivable. It works silently, like a secret helper. The fire crackles. The hangings rest heavy and loyal along the walls. And you, leaning back against them, feel protected in a small, humble way. Not by armor or weapons or thick castle walls, but by wool, by hands that wove threads into landscapes, by centuries of quiet ingenuity. In this moment, you understand perfectly. Tapestries aren't just decoration. They are winter's antidote, stitched patiently across stone that refuses to love you back. You leave the great hall after breakfast, stepping into a side passage where the air immediately stiffens around you again. The cold here doesn't shout. It presses, low, steady, patient. You walk slowly, adjusting your cloak, and the shuffle of your boots against the stone reminds you of the real enemy beneath your feet. The floor. It is always there, always cold, always draining warmth from you like a silent thief. You look down at the flagstones, smooth in places, rough in others, patched here and there with wood. They seem solid, dependable, dignified. But you've lived in this castle long enough now to know what they really are in winter. Heat sinks. They drink warmth like dry soil drinks water. Even your thick socks and leather footwear can't fully protect you. Every step sends a faint complaint up your bones. As you move farther, you notice something surprising. The floor changes. In one stretch of corridor, bundles of rushes have been spread thickly across the stones. The rushes are loose, golden, slightly fragrant, and they soften the sound of footsteps. You crouch down and touch them. They're dry, flexible, and layered like the world's most rustic rug. When you stand again, you feel the difference immediately. The cold coming up through the soles of your shoes dulls a little. It's not warmth, but it's a shield. This practice shows up in the most ordinary medieval records, right alongside food and firewood. Rushes were harvested in warmer seasons, dried, sometimes mixed with herbs, and spread in halls or chambers to make the floors less hostile. They absorbed spills, cushioned feet, and added insulation. They also needed replacing, especially in winter when damp and grime built up fast. It was messy work, not glamorous, but essential. A winter floor without rushes could feel like a punishment. You follow a servant as she moves down the corridor carrying a wide basket of fresh reeds. She sprinkles them in a practiced motion, spreading a new layer over thin spots. The sound of the reeds hitting stone is soft, almost soothing. You can smell a faint, grassy sweetness, a memory of summer preserved in straw. Even that scent makes the cold feel briefly less stern. In rooms used for more important gatherings, you notice thicker coverings, rugs, not the patterned, luxurious carpets you might imagine, though wealthy families had those too. Some rugs here are simple felted wool, dense and heavy. Others are stitched from scraps, a mosaic of colors that looks both humble and practical. When you step onto one, the change is immediate. The floor stops feeling quite so predatory. There's a chamber near the solar where the lady of the household receives visitors. Its stone floor is almost entirely covered by a broad woolen rug dyed in muted reds. You run the side of your foot over it. The fibers are coarse but warm. Beneath it, thick boards create a barrier between occupants and the raw stone foundation. It's a subtle luxury, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, but shapes every hour spent in the room. A curious detail catches your eye. Under the edges of the rug, small wooden slats lift the textile just slightly off the stone. This isn't accidental. It creates a thin buffer of air, which slows the transfer of cold. Someone in this household has thought carefully about how to manage the winter floor. You imagine the quiet satisfaction of stepping into this chamber after time spent in harsher parts of the castle. Not all floors receive such tender care. You head toward the servants' wing and feel the change underfoot immediately. The rushes are thinner, more worn. In some places, bare stone peeks through, looking almost smug in its frost. Servants move quickly, partly because they're busy, partly because lingering means losing warmth. Their steps are short, brisk, made for cold terrain. You learn from watching them. Long strides waste heat. Shorter steps conserve it. As you walk through the scullery, you notice a woman scraping up old rushes with a flat wooden shovel. The reeds crunch and crumble as she lifts them, revealing darkened stone beneath. They carry the smell of spilled ale, sweat, roasted fat, and something faintly herbal. It's not unpleasant, just honest. Life accumulates here. Winter doesn't allow surfaces to stay clean for long. She replaces them with new bundles, shaking them out like someone airing a blanket. She hums as she works, and her breath fogs lightly in the air. This simple maintenance is part of the castle's winter rhythm. Floors breathe with the seasons too. In summer, bare stone feels cool, refreshing even. In winter, the same stone becomes a slow, heavy cold that seeps upward relentlessly. So people adapt. They cover, they buffer, they tread gently, as if not to wake the cold beneath. You step into a small side room used for storing linens. It is unheated, and the cold hits with full force. The floor here has no rushes, no rugs, nothing to soften its bite. The air feels sharper because of it. You understand instantly why no one lingers in these spaces. A room with a naked floor in winter is a room that belongs to the cold. And yet, in some places, the floor becomes warmer by design. You find a narrow passage above the kitchen, where heat from the cooking fires below rises through the walls and floorboards. The warmth is faint, more like a memory of heat than heat itself, but noticeable. People sometimes pass through here just to warm their feet for a moment. You do the same, savoring the surprising comfort of it. The wood beneath you feels alive compared to stone. But the castle's most curious flooring trick appears in one of the upstairs chambers reserved for guests of higher status. The floorboards are thicker, tightly fitted, and beneath them lies a layer of packed earth that stays relatively stable in temperature. It isn't warm, but it's less violently cold than exposed stone. You kneel to touch the floor, feeling the smoother grain, and understand why nobles preferred these chambers in winter. Even a few degrees of difference can change how a night feels. A cook passing by tells you that in her grandmother's home, far from here, people used to scatter crushed herbs among the rushes. Lavender in summer, thyme, mint. These scents would rise when stepped on, mixing with the warmth of cooking fires. She laughs softly as she describes it. It wasn't luxury, she insists. It was practicality. Herbs discouraged pests and improved the smell of a room that couldn't always be aired out. But it also made winter floors feel kinder, like a small gift to tired feet. As you descend toward the main hall again, You think about another question that scholars still toy with. How widespread were these flooring strategies across medieval households? Some believe richly woven rugs were rare outside elite circles, their cost too great for common use. Others point to inventories of even modest households listing small carpets, mats, and rush coverings, suggesting a broader familiarity. The truth likely lies between. Expensive textiles belonged to the wealthy, but the idea of softening cold floors was universal. People used whatever materials they had. When you return to the hall, you sit on a bench beside a stretch of fresh rushes. A few leap out under your boots, giving a whispery sound. The warmth from the fire doesn't reach the floor fully, but with the rushes there, the chill rises less fiercely. You can almost imagine the hall in deep winter without them. A stone ocean, waves of cold rising, stealing comfort from anyone foolish enough to stand still too long. You shift your feet, grateful for the humble reeds. They don't look like much, yet they shape the way you move, the way the castle breathes, the way winter feels against your skin. Every step becomes less of a battle. And as the fire crackles beside you, warming the air but never quite reaching the floor, you realize the quiet truth of winter in a medieval castle. Survival doesn't come from grand ideas. It comes from small, steady decisions layered across stone. A handful of rushes, a wool rug, a plank lifted just an inch, a floor that remembers summer for you, even when the walls refuse. The day wears on, and the castle's rhythms unfold around you. Fires crackle and fade, footsteps echo through stone passages, and the cold keeps pressing its argument against every human attempt at comfort. By late afternoon, the sun is already sinking. Winter days are short, and nights feel even longer when the cold deepens. You find yourself hovering near the hall fire again, watching the logs burn lower, knowing that at some point, night will ask everyone to retreat to smaller flames. That's when you notice a servant carrying something curious through the hall. It's a metal pan with a long handle, shaped like a shallow bowl with a lid that clamps shut. You've seen versions of it before, but now you understand its purpose more clearly. It's a bed warmer, filled with glowing embers, and used to heat the sheets before someone climbs in. The servant moves briskly, as if carrying something alive that might bite if handled too slowly. She slides the pan under the linens of a noble's bed, gliding it back and forth to push heat through the fabric. When she opens the lid, a faint hiss escapes. The air around it smells like warm metal and wood smoke. The sheets that were stiff and cold minutes ago are now supple with borrowed warmth. You picture someone slipping into that bed later, grateful beyond words for the 2 minutes of comfort this tool provides. In humbler rooms, the solutions are simpler. A worker in the corner holds a heated stone wrapped in linen, the same kind you used before, but this one is larger, probably kept near the kitchen hearth for hours. When she carries it away, you notice the careful way she supports it, like a precious loaf of bread. She'll tuck it into a bed or place it at someone's feet while they warm themselves before sleep. It's the sort of small miracle winter relies on. And then there are the hand warmers. A young lad walks by clutching a little ceramic pot with tiny holes in the lid. Inside, a piece of charcoal glows. He uses it to warm his fingers between chores. The pot is shaped like a pear, glazed and cracked from years of use. You suspect it has been dropped more than once, and yet here it is, still doing its job. These portable pockets of heat are surprisingly effective. You can see how quickly his breath stops puffing after he hugs the warmer to his chest. Different households have different tricks. Some people heat smooth river stones in the embers and slip them into cloth pouches. Others wrap bricks in wool. In places with good metalworkers, people use small brass or iron containers that hold embers safely. The ingenuity is endless because the cold is relentless. A serving woman near the hall shows you another trick she uses during her rounds. She keeps a small cloth bag tucked into her apron pocket. Inside are dried cherry pits that have been warmed at the hearth. They stay hot longer than you'd imagine, and she presses the bag between her palms whenever her fingers stiffen. It smells faintly sweet, like fruit ghosts. You follow her to a chamber where another woman is preparing a warm stone for an elderly resident. She places the stone near the foot of the bed, adjusts the blankets, and then rubs her own hands together. Her knuckles are red from cold. She smiles at you, as if to say warmth is a shared victory, no matter how small. On a table nearby sits a clay cup of hot broth. The steam rising from it is comforting even at a distance. You think of how people drink warm ale, herbal infusions, or spiced wine in winter, not only for taste or tradition, but because warmth begins inside the body too. Small sips change how your fingers feel. It's like lighting a fire in your stomach. You wander down a corridor and see a guard warming his hands over a tiny brazier set into a metal frame. The brazier gives off almost no light, just heat, and he stands close to it, letting his breath cloud the air. Guards often rely on such small heat sources. They can't always abandon their posts for the big hearth in the hall, so they survive with these miniature suns. One guard taps the top of the brazier with a gloved finger and tells you that in harsh winters, guards are sometimes given extra rations of drink or hot porridge, so they don't freeze during long night watches. He laughs quietly and says the food warms him faster than any fire. You believe him instantly. There's another odd little tool you encounter in the armory, a small iron basket on a chain, filled with charcoal. The man polishing helmets tells you it's sometimes used to warm clothes before a long ride. A rider might hold his gloves near it, or slip his boots over the opening to soften stiff leather. It looks like a dangerous toy, but he handles it with easy confidence. And then you come across something you didn't expect. In one chamber, kept by a noblewoman with thoughtful habits, sits a round pottery vessel filled with heated sand, fine-grained, dry, and surprisingly warm. She uses it to warm her hands while reading or sewing. The sand holds heat for a long time. When she stirs it with a wooden spoon, it glows faintly, like it remembers the fire it came from. This sparks a thought in your mind about winter across cultures. Different parts of the medieval world developed different heating tricks. Soapstone, for example, retains warmth far better than river rock, and households lucky enough to have it could keep a stone warm deep into the night. Some regions used brass foot warmers with sliding vents to control embers inside. Elsewhere, people used heated tiles, sometimes decorated, stacked under blankets like thermal batteries. These objects show up in scattered archaeological finds, each one a whisper from a cold season long past. You stop at an alcove where a carpenter is repairing a damaged warming pan. Its lid is dented, its hinge loose. He taps at the metal gently, testing the movement. He says these pans are more fragile than they look, and winter puts them through heavy use. If a hinge breaks, someone sleeps colder. If the lid cracks, sparks can escape. Every tool that touches fire must be watched. There's a discussion among historians about how commonly these warming devices were used. Some argue they were everyday necessities in wealthier households. Others suggest they were occasional comforts, not universally accessible. Both ideas feel right depending on the room you stand in. In the Lord's chamber, warming pans are polished and ready. In the servants' quarters, stones wrapped in cloth are the mainstay. Everyone warms their bed in winter. They just do it at different levels of luxury. As you return to the hall, you see a boy sitting on the floor with a warmed brick under his cloak. He's smiling, the kind of small, pleased smile only heat can produce. The brick radiates a slow, steady warmth that touches his ribs and belly. He closes his eyes for a moment, and his shoulders soften. It's a child's version of receiving a gift. And suddenly you understand how nights in castles become survivable. Not because one great fire does everything, but because countless small flames, stones, tiles, and embers work in quiet partnership. Warmth comes in handfuls, not floods. You sit by the hearth again, letting your palms hover over the fire. The room feels a little softer now. Not warm, but threaded with human solutions. Each ember, each stone, each cloth-wrapped brick is a tiny defiance against the season. Night will be cold again, but the castle has tools. You have tools. And winter, though fierce, is no longer absolute. The castle grows darker as the afternoon fades, but the kitchen glows like a stubborn ember at the heart of it all. You follow the scent long before you see the fire. It threads through corridors like a warm invitation, a promise that at least one room in this stone labyrinth is fighting bravely against the cold. When you push open the kitchen door, heat hits you immediately. Not a gentle warmth, but a wall of it, thick and smoky and alive. You step inside and feel your skin wake under the sudden change. The kitchen is louder than any other space in the castle. Pots clank, knives thump against wooden boards, sparks jump from the great cooking hearth. People move quickly in motions, so practiced they resemble choreography. You walk a few steps farther in, letting your body soak the heat. This is the engine room of winter survival. Here, fire never rests. Even at night, something is always simmering, roasting, heating, boiling. The stones around the hearth glow faintly with accumulated warmth, and your face tingles pleasantly when you get close. The fire isn't just wide, it's deep, Logs are stacked in tiers, feeding flames that curl around pot hooks and spit rods. A copper cauldron hangs over the hottest part, bubbling with something thick and aromatic. You smell onions, grains, and meat, all softened into one sleepy stew. The air is humid from the constant boiling, a rare sensation in a winter castle. It softens your throat in a way that makes you exhale without realizing you needed to. Kitchen staff weave around each other in well-rehearsed patterns. A woman brings in a basket of firewood, her arms tense but steady. A man turns a spit, the meat crackling in its own juices. Another racks the bread, tapping each loaf to test the crust. Their movements radiate warmth, not just physical but social. In winter, kitchens are community. One of the cooks, flour on her cheek, gestures for you to stand out of the way of a passing pot. She smiles at your wide-eyed expression. You realize she must feel this heat every day, no longer stunned by it. The skin on her hands is reddened, testimony to days spent near flames in cold seasons. She tells you something in her quick, accented voice, and even if you don't catch the words, the tone carries the message clearly. Warmth is work. She points toward the rescued ember pile in one corner. A smaller hearth burns there, used for baking or quick heating. Near it, two young assistants warm their hands openly, faces blissful. They are probably the warmest people in the castle right now besides those asleep behind bed curtains. You envy them a little. A detail many old household accounts make clear is that kitchens often served as informal winter shelters. Servants slept nearby on the warmest nights. Cats prowled for scraps and mice. Dogs sprawled on the warm stones near the hearth. The kitchen, in its messy, loud, smoky glory, was the closest thing to central heating this castle had. You follow a servant toward the scullery attached to the kitchen. She carries a steaming basin and disappears behind a low archway. You step in after her and gasp softly at the contrast. The air is cold again, though still warmer than the outer corridors. She sets the basin down, and steam billows upward before fading. She sighs at the chill and grabs a cloak from a peg. This is the other half of kitchen life. Heat in one room, cold lurking right next door. People here live between extremes. On the way back, you notice the giant wooden table near the center of the kitchen. It's scarred with knife marks, darkened by years of spilled broth and flour dust. Workers chop vegetables with swift, rhythmic precision. Carrots, leeks, turnips, all staples of winter cooking. Hard roots were dependable food, once fresh harvests were long gone. The sound of chopping is as soothing as the fire crackling, a reminder that warmth isn't just flames, it's food, calories, energy for the body to burn. Someone hands you a bowl, not fancy, not delicate, but filled with hot broth. You wrap your hands around it and feel the heat seep into your fingers like forgiveness. The first sip is simple and honest. Warmth spreads through your chest, easing the tightness the cold has been building. You realize how much this hot kitchen sustains everyone in the castle. It provides daily warmth from the inside out. As you continue observing, you catch a curious detail. Hanging from beams overhead are bundles of herbs: rosemary, sage, lovage, thyme. Even in winter, these herbs matter. They flavor food, yes, but they also freshen air, and sometimes are used in household remedies. When they dry, fragments fall onto the floor, releasing faint scents that lace through the smoke. You breathe in the herbal air and feel your mind settle a little. Next to the herbs, large slabs of meat hang from hooks, aging in the cool air. Winter is the only season cold enough for this. The process is delicate, requiring constant attention, but the kitchen staff handles it with ease. They know when to leave the meat out, when to bring it closer to the warmth, when to wrap it. This mixture of heat and cold is part of daily life here. Someone whistles. A pot is lifted off the fire with a hook, steam roaring upward in a cloud so thick you can barely see the cook's face for a moment. She wipes her brow with her sleeve, leaving a smear of flour on her forehead that makes her laugh. The moment is small and warm, like a spark from the fire. You look around the room and notice how many bodies share the space. People stand close to each other, partly because they're working, partly because staying near warmth is instinctive here. Shoulder to shoulder, they form a human buffer, trapping heat. Even the hum of their voices warms something inside you. The kitchen is the castle's beating heart, and you feel its pulse most clearly now. In the midst of all this, a worker shows you a small trick that feels almost magical. He takes a cloth, dips a corner into warm water, and presses it against his cold, stiffened fingers. The steam seems to melt into his skin, and he flexes his hand with relief. It's a reminder that warmth here is never wasted. Every drop, every ember, every pocket of heat is valued. You pause near one of the ovens, letting the radiant heat seep through your cloak. You think about how winter shapes the pace of life. Meals become more than meals. They become opportunities for warmth and gathering. People linger near the hearth longer. They talk slower. They wait for the next pot to boil, because being near the heat keeps the cold at bay. A point some scholars reflect on is whether medieval kitchens were truly comfortable or simply less miserable than the rest of the castle. The debate lies in the balance of smoke, heat, and labour. Kitchens were hot, yes, but also smoky, crowded, and full of hazards. Yet compared to the frigid corridors, this room feels like a sanctuary. You can understand both perspectives because your own body is living the contradiction. You return to the hall for a moment and feel the temperature drop again. It's not freezing, but the difference is stark. You find yourself thinking of the kitchen with affection, like an old friend you've come to rely on. When you pass by the kitchen door once more, the fire roars louder as someone adds new logs. Sparks jump, and a wave of heat rolls out like a blessing. You linger in the doorway, letting it kiss your cheeks, and for a moment, you feel genuinely human again. The kitchen is not luxurious. It's chaotic, smoky, loud, and unfiltered. But in winter, it is warmth without judgment. It feeds you, dries your clothes, restores your fingers, and teaches you the quiet truth of medieval survival. Fire is life, and the places where fire lives are home. You linger near the kitchen a moment longer, letting your hands rest in the warm air drifting from the hearth. But eventually you step back into the corridor, and winter greets you like an old, cold acquaintance. It presses softly at first, then settles in, reminding you that warmth in this castle is never permanent. Your breath curls into a faint cloud as you walk, and your stomach gives a small, timely reminder that heat isn't the only thing a body needs to fight the season. Food in winter isn't simple nourishment here, it's survival fuel. A servant carrying a basket of barley passes you, nodding as she heads toward the pantry. You follow her, feeling the air grow cooler as you descend into a storeroom built into the thickest part of the castle. Down here, winter rules with quiet authority. The room is dry, dim, and tightly organized. Shelves hold sacks of grain, wheels of hard cheese, smoked meats, jars of preserved fruits, and bundles of dried herbs. Everything has a place. Everything has a purpose. When you touch one of the sacks, the linen feels stiff with cold. The grain inside shifts with a soft hiss, like dry sand. The servant explains with a gesture that winter diets rely heavily on these grains. Barley, oats, rye. They are predictable, storable, and steady. They don't spoil easily. They keep people alive when fields lie frozen. You realize this is the castle's quiet heartbeat, just as much as the fire is. Without grain, there is no warmth your body can create. Heat begins with calories. As you explore further, you notice rows of salted meats hanging from wooden racks. The air in this section is sharper, tinged with salt, smoke, and old wood. Curing meat was a meticulous process, and the cold months made it possible. You see strips of pork, joints of beef, even fish in some cases, if the castle lies near rivers or coasts. Each piece is a story of work, slaughtering, salting, smoking, turning, checking. Winter requires preparation done long before the first snow. You pick up a small cloth bag and weigh it in your hand. It's filled with dried legumes, peas, lentils, broad beans. These little seeds are humble, but they carry protein that bodies depend on. A winter diet in a medieval castle is built around exactly these reliable foundations. They were cherished more than any delicate summer fruit because they were loyal, they lasted, they fed. Back in the kitchen, you watch cooks ladle thick stew into wooden bowls. It's hearty, a blend of barley, vegetables, and meat scraps that dissolve into velvet. The steam rising from the pot carries the smell of fat, onion, and something sweet you can't quite place. When you take a sip, warmth blooms in your chest like someone lighting a candle inside your ribs. You feel instantly more awake. A cook laughs when she sees your reaction. She gestures toward the pot and taps her stomach. She's telling you something true in any era. Winter food needs to stick to the bones. Light meals won't do. Your body burns more calories just staying alive in this kind of cold. Every spoonful is a small defense. She knows it. Everyone does. Nearby, a boy tends a cauldron of pottage, the everyday stew that changes depending on what's available. Today it's cabbage, yesterday it might have been leeks or turnips, a handful of peas, a pinch of herbs, scraps of fat. Pottage is medieval comfort food, but also a necessity. It's cheap, filling, and endlessly adaptable. When you dip the ladle and watch the vegetables swirl in the broth, you see the practicality of it. It feeds everyone without draining supplies too quickly. Then someone hands you a mug, not ale this time, but warm spiced drink, maybe mulled wine, maybe a heated ale with cloves or cinnamon, if the household is wealthy enough to afford spices. You bring it to your lips and inhale. The spices cut through winter like a soft, warm blade. You sip and feel your fingers relax. These spiced drinks show up in feasts, yes, but also in ordinary evenings. They weren't just indulgence, they helped blood flow. They warmed the throat against the constant cold air. Another worker offers you a slice of coarse rye bread. It's dense and dark, with a slightly sour smell. She smiles as you bite into it. Rye withstands colder climates better than wheat, so it was a reliable winter grain in many regions. The bread fills your mouth slowly, and you feel its weight in your belly. Bread like this isn't a treat. It's warmth converted into food. You pause by a pot of porridge, slowly thickening over a gentle flame. The cook stirs it with long, slow circles. She lifts a wooden spoon, blows on it, and lets you taste. It's plain at first: oats, water, maybe a little milk if the household has enough. But it's honest. Your body responds immediately, like someone smoothing a hand over your insides. Porridge was often breakfast in cold months, giving people enough fuel to begin the day's hardest tasks. A barrel nearby holds ale, cloudy, hearty, mildly alcoholic, not the drink of indulgence you might imagine, but the everyday staple. It provides carbohydrates and some nutrients, and because the brewing process kills harmful bacteria, it's safer than raw water. You watch a servant draw a cup for herself after a long shift. She drinks deeply, closes her eyes, and exhales. In this moment, ale isn't celebration, it's restoration. As you move about the kitchen, a man slices a small block of cheese from the pantry stores. Hard cheese, aged long enough to survive winter without spoiling. The flavor is sharp, earthy, a little salty. It pairs with the bread in a way that makes you appreciate the quiet inventiveness of winter meals. These foods are simple, but chosen carefully, because they last, nourish, and warm. Then you see a small pot on a side table. It contains something the cook calls butter drippings, melted fat mixed with herbs and stored for later use. She spreads a tiny amount on bread, and you taste richness beyond what you expected. Fats were precious in winter, essential to keep energy levels up. Castle kitchens saved every drop of rendered fat from roasting and cooking. Nothing was thrown away. A little fat could transform a bland grain into something sustaining. You notice that even treats have a winter logic. Dried apples, honeyed nuts, a pot of preserved berries sealed in wax. When you try one, the sweetness hits like a memory of sunshine. These little bits of stored summer keep spirits alive during long cold stretches. A small argument breaks out near the end of the kitchen. Two cooks debate whether today's ration of meat should be used now or saved for tomorrow. You can't follow every word, but their tones reveal the stakes. Food timing matters. A feast too early leaves people hungry later. A feast too late leaves morale low. The castle's cooks must do winter arithmetic in their heads every day. And this touches a larger point that researchers still wrestle with: how plentiful winter diets truly were in castles across regions and centuries. Some evidence paints a picture of abundance for noble households, large meat stores, plentiful grains, ample wine. Other sources suggest rationing, lean months, and tight control over pantry ledgers. Much depended on wealth, climate, harvest success, and management. Standing here watching the kitchen staff work, you can believe both possibilities. A well-run castle might eat generously. A struggling one might feel every shortage. But wherever the truth falls, one thing is certain: winter food isn't just food. It's warmth disguised as flavor, heat disguised as broth, survival disguised as supper. As you take another sip of the warm spiced drink, the sensation spreads through you like a slow glow. Your body feels steadier. Your fingers loosen their grip on cold. You exhale, watching the steam drift gently away. You look around at the cooks, the workers, the fires, the pots, the careful organization of stores, and you understand with perfect clarity: this is winter's real fireplace. Not the hearth in the hall, not the brazier in your room, but the kitchen that feeds the castle from within. Every bite you take is a small flame the cold cannot extinguish. You step out of the kitchen with a warm stomach and a calmer mind, but the castle wastes no time in reminding you where you are. The corridor greets you with its usual chill, slipping under your cloak like a familiar prankster. You inhale, and the air feels sharper again, thinner, almost metallic. For a moment you just stand still, letting your breath settle, and that's when you feel it. Stillness itself is dangerous here. The cold loves it when you stand still. You take a few slow steps and your muscles respond immediately, loosening as if waking from a nap. Medieval life did not allow much idleness, not because people lacked stories to tell or songs to sing, but because your own body was a heating system. Movement creates warmth. Work stirs blood. Even something as small as flexing your fingers keeps stiffness at bay. The people living in this castle understand that instinctively. You head toward the courtyard where a cluster of servants is busy with winter chores. Even in cold seasons, there is always work that must continue. Firewood must be sorted, barrels hauled, livestock tended, snow swept from the walkways if the weather has left a white film overnight. A stable boy leads a horse in circles to keep the animal's muscles warm. A laundress beats frozen linens to loosen the ice so they can be brought indoors. Every person is moving. Every action is a reminder. Winter punishes stillness. One woman carrying a basket of laundry laughs when she sees you rubbing your hands together. She taps her feet and gestures that walking faster helps. You mimic her pace and discover she's right. The cold feels different when your heart beats a little harder. Your breath warms your scarf. The movement sends heat rising from your core like a quiet fire waking up. You pass a set of stairs leading upward. A guard climbs them with determined steps, muttering something under his breath. His armor creaks, stiff from cold. Metal chills quickly, and he knows better than to stop moving while wearing so much of it. If he stands too long, cold metal touches the skin through his layers. He will end his shift aching. It becomes clear that a medieval winter isn't fought primarily with fires or blankets, it's fought with labor. Daily life requires constant motion, carrying, stirring, mending, lifting, hauling. Many of these tasks generate heat naturally. People don't say they're warming themselves. They say they're working, but the outcome is the same. You walk into a small side room where several women are spinning wool. Their fingers move rhythmically, their feet treadle the spinning wheels, and their bodies sway with the motion. Even though the room is cold, breath misting with every exhale, none of them seem to struggle. Working keeps the chill from sinking in. When hands move constantly, blood moves constantly. You can almost see the warmth they create. You stand with them for a few minutes, watching how their bodies never fully pause. Even when one woman stops spinning to stretch her shoulders, she keeps her feet tapping against the floor. Another hums softly, a rhythm to keep her fingers going. The motion becomes music the bones understand. As you continue walking, you notice young boys sweeping the corridors with stiff bristled brooms. They push the broom forward, carve a path, then pull it back again. The motion is repetitive, warm, and necessary. Dust and rushes accumulate quickly in winter when doors stay shut more often. One of the boys grins, showing his red cheeks and runny nose, and tells you in gestures that sweeping is better than freezing. He's not wrong. Through an open doorway you glimpse the smithy. Even in winter, repairs don't stop. A farrier hammers a glowing piece of metal, sparks dancing like fireflies. The heat radiating from the forge is so strong you feel it even from the doorway. Workers in the smithy often enjoy the warmest workspace in the entire castle, but it comes at the price of constant labor. Their arms strain, their backs ache, their clothes smell of metal and smoke, but they are never truly cold. A man chopping wood in the courtyard catches your attention. He raises the axe overhead and brings it down with a fierce rhythm. The sound carries across the stones, solid, steady, almost meditative. Splitting logs is one of the most physically demanding winter tasks, and everyone knows it's not just about fuel. It is also about warming the body that splits them. He wipes his forehead with his sleeve, breathes hard, and smiles in a way that tells you he feels the heat blooming through him. This is exercise before exercise had a name. Then there's the castle's quiet rule about chores. Nobody works alone in winter if they can help it, not just for safety, but because people warm each other simply by sharing space. 2 women kneading dough side by side, 3 men pulling a cart up a short incline, a group sorting grain by hand. You notice their breath mingling in the cold air, their shared effort creating something like communal heat. You see a maid assigned to fetch water from the well. The rope creaks loudly. The bucket slaps against the inside of the well shaft, and she braces herself with both feet as she hauls it up. Water is heavier in winter. It seems to resist being lifted, as if it prefers the darkness underground. The maid's arms tremble, but she doesn't stop. Once she pours the water into a wooden tub, she rubs her hands together and laughs. The work warmed her more than the water ever will. In the fabric room, you watch a man repairing a cloak. His needle flashes in and out of the wool, and his hands barely stay still for more than a second. Even sewing is a winter-friendly task. Fast fingers, steady motion. It warms the wrists and keeps numbness away. He gestures for you to sit, but you shake your head, knowing stillness is the first step toward feeling cold again. There's a small courtyard garden, stripped bare by the season, where two women shake dried herbs from summer bundles into storage jars. Their movements are brisk, and the dried leaves flutter like brittle snowflakes. They keep talking and working, stamping their feet every so often when cold nips at their toes. It dawns on you that medieval people didn't think of winter fitness or winter warmth the way modern minds do. They didn't say, keep moving to stay warm. They simply moved because living required it, fetching food, stirring pots, carrying loads, repairing roofs, turning mills. Even prayer involves kneeling, rising, clasping hands, small motions that wake muscles. Calories from food become heat only if the body uses them. Winter taught everyone, from children to elders, that living was the furnace. You notice that even nobles follow this rule in their own way. A lord walks briskly down a corridor to attend a council meeting. A lady paces while instructing servants or reviewing household accounts. Movement doesn't erase the cold, but it keeps it from claiming too much space. Watching all this, you remember a conversation from earlier. A steward said that a still body loses warmth faster than a moving one, even in rooms with tapestries. That kind of knowledge doesn't appear on parchment. It appears in fingertips gone numb before their time. There's a lingering question among researchers about how physically active castle residents truly were during winter. Some argue that work slowed dramatically in the cold months, relying on preserved food and rest. Others point to constant winter tasks, fuel hauling, animal care, repair work, kitchen duties as signs that activity never really stopped. Observing this castle, you can see truth in both perspectives. Certain jobs pause, but daily maintenance increases. The rhythm changes, but it never stills. As you return to the hall, your body feels warmer than before. Not because the air is warmer, but because you have been moving, matching the castle's tempo. Even your thoughts feel less stiff. Motion softens everything. You sit for a moment near the hearth, catching your breath. The heat touches your face gently, but the warmth in your chest comes from the work you've witnessed and the steps you've taken. Winter is still outside, knocking with patient knuckles. But you've learned its secret weakness. It struggles against bodies in motion. And so you rise again, slowly, with a small smile, because warmth is not a place here, it is a verb. You leave the hall once more, stretched out and pleasantly warm from moving around, but the castle wastes no time in reminding you of the deeper truth of winter living. Humans were never meant to battle the cold alone, and in the medieval world, they didn't. You follow a narrow passage toward the lower courtyard, guided first by the faint sound of bleating, then by a smell that is unmistakably alive. The animal sheds sit along the inner walls of the castle, tucked where wind hits least fiercely. The moment you step inside, the warmth surprises you. It's not the clean warmth of a hearth. It's thick, earthy, moist, the warmth of breath, bodies, manure, and straw. You inhale carefully. It's not unpleasant, just deeply honest. And more importantly, it is warm enough that your fingers immediately stop complaining. Animals are heaters with hooves. Sheep huddle together in a dense woolen cluster, their breaths rising as faint clouds. A cow chews loudly, steam drifting from her nostrils. A pair of goats nuzzle each other, shifting their hooves in the straw. Their bodies radiate heat like living furnaces, each one giving off enough warmth to make this shed feel almost cozy. It's strange, but you find yourself gravitating toward them, drawn by an instinct older than castles themselves. A young stable hand grins when he sees you hovering near the animals for warmth. He gestures proudly at the cows and sheep, then at the thick walls of the shed. He doesn't need words. The message is clear. These animals help keep the humans alive, not only by providing milk or meat later, but by creating warmth right now. Throughout rural Europe, peasants slept in the same building as their animals in winter. Even here, in a castle with its rigid hierarchy and separate spaces, the logic persists. Animals generate heat. Heat is precious, so animals stay close. The stable hand leads you deeper, to the horses. Their stalls smell of hay, leather, and a faint sweetness from stored grain. Horses are warm-blooded in a way that feels almost radiant. One leans its head toward you, exhaling a breath so warm it fogs the air between you. You touch its neck, thick with winter fur, and the heat beneath your palm feels like pure generosity. Winter coats on animals grow dense, trapping warmth under coarse guard hairs. When you stroke the horse's flanks, you feel that built-in insulation. You imagine what it must be like for people tending to them on freezing mornings, hands warming just by brushing through fur. You stand there for a long moment, letting the horse's warmth seep into your own body. It's easy to see why stable chores were coveted in cold months. Yes, they were dirty and tiring, but they were also warm. A small cat darts between your feet and disappears into a hay pile. Seconds later, you see a flick of its tail as it settles in. Cats knew exactly where to find the warmest corners. Dogs, too. A pair of them sleep near the sheep, curled tight, paws covering their noses. In many winter households, even noble families let animals indoors, not just because they were useful or beloved, but because living warmth is living warmth. You step into the adjoining henhouse. Chickens rustle and mutter, puffed up into little feathered balls. Their collective heat raises the temperature of the room just a little, enough that the smell of straw and feathers is tinged with the faintest hint of comfort. A servant gathers eggs carefully, tucking them under her cloak so the cold won't crack them. She tells you, with a practical nod, that winter eggs are fragile things. Everything is fragile in winter unless handled with care. Moving back toward the main courtyard, you notice a pig pen on the far side. Pigs shuffle through straw, their hot, damp breath rising like steam over a cauldron. They're noisy, and the air is ripe, but the warmth rolling out of the pen is undeniable. You understand instinctively why older European structures often housed pigs under or beside human sleeping areas. A pig's body is an astonishing heat engine. The medieval world took advantage of that fact with zero hesitation. You sit on a low wall nearby and simply watch the animals for a while. Their quiet sounds, snorts, munches, soft bleats blend with the distant clang of the smithy. You realize how interconnected winter life is. Animals aren't an afterthought. They are part of the fortress ecosystem. Their heat, their movement, their straw, their bodies all become elements of human survival. A stable hand tells you something else through gesture and half-understood words. The castle's layout itself hints at this relationship. Sheds are built along walls that receive morning sun or avoid the worst winds. Passageways are placed so workers can reach the animals quickly without losing heat on long outdoor treks. Even manure has its winter logic. Piles of it can generate surprising warmth as they decompose. In some places, people stored straw-covered heaps near walls for insulation. You follow him into a smaller chamber adjoining the shed, used to store fodder. The air here is warmer than the corridors, thanks to the rising heat from animals below. Some chambers above stables were even used as sleeping areas for lower-ranking servants. The warmth from horses and livestock below drifted upward, creating one of the few consistently warm indoor spaces in a winter castle. Hardly luxurious, but undeniably effective. You sit on a bale of hay and feel heat rising through the wooden floorboards. Workers must have known exactly where to sit on breaks. You imagine them warming their hands, sharing gossip, laughing softly, letting the animals' breath and body heat chase the chill from their bones. There's an odd little custom that comes to mind, something you've heard mentioned in passing by other castle residents. On extremely cold nights, some people place small bundles of wool shorn from the sheep earlier in the year into their clothing for extra insulation. It's not elegant, but it works. Things that come from animals, wool, hides, furs, even down hold warmth in ways nothing else can. The medieval world understood this deeply, not through textbooks, but through cold skin and grateful hands. And there's a question that researchers still discuss. To what extent did animals actually share indoor space with humans in castles? Some argue that direct co-sheltering was rare in noble settings, limited to servants' quarters or outbuildings. Others point to written descriptions and architectural traces, showing that human and animal spaces often overlapped more than we assume, especially in harsh winters. Standing in this warm, earthy shed, listening to the quiet animal breaths, you can imagine both scenarios depending on wealth, region, and season. You rise again, brushing straw from your cloak. As you head back toward the hall, the cold wraps around you more tightly than before. You feel the temperature shift immediately, and it makes you appreciate what you just left behind. Animal warmth isn't pretty, it isn't perfumed, but it's one of the oldest, most reliable forms of heat humans have ever used. You step into the corridor, draw your cloak close, and give a small shiver. Suddenly the castle feels a little emptier, a little too quiet, without the soft sounds of livestock filling the air. And as you walk, you carry the memory of that warmth with you, those steady breaths, those wool-wrapped bodies, those small but vital gifts of heat that kept entire households alive through the longest winters. The warmth of the livestock sheds lingers in your clothes long after you leave them behind, but winter inside the castle wastes no time reclaiming its territory. A draught curls under a doorway, a memory of frost brushes your knuckles. You pull your cloak tighter and follow a narrow stairwell upward, curious about something people rarely talk about, except in half-joking tones. Bathing. You reach a small chamber near the upper floors. When the door creaks open, a wave of cold hits you first, then the faint scent of herbs and old wood. The castle's bathroom isn't grand. It's a stone space with a heavy wooden tub, a small hearth that currently sits dark, and a stack of folded linens that looks stiff from the chill. At first glance, the idea of taking a bath in this room feels like a dare. The cold is so insistent you want to wrap yourself deeper in your cloak, not shed layers. Yet people did bathe, even in winter. Not daily, not casually, and certainly not without planning, but they washed when they could. Hygiene in a cold castle wasn't laziness or dirtiness. It was logistics. You needed heat, you needed water, you needed help. A servant carrying a small bucket steps in behind you. She looks at the hearth, then at you, then smiles with a shrug that says, "Do you really want to do this?" You shake your head, and she laughs quietly. The cold in the room feels like a warning. Still, she walks over and shows you how the bath would be prepared. First, several buckets of water would be heated near the kitchen or in a side hearth, then carried up the stairs heavy, steaming, and sloshing. That alone is labor. Next, the tub must be warmed by filling it partly, letting the hot water rest inside the wood to soften and heat it, then dumping it out and refilling. Only then could a person step in without the shock of freezing wood. And even then, the air remains cold. You run your fingers along the edge of the wooden tub. The wood is smooth but icy. If you were to sit inside it on a winter day with no proper heating, you would feel steam rising around you while your shoulders and neck shivered in cold air. The thermal conflict is almost comedic. Medieval washing was a dance between fire and frost. The servant demonstrates how bathers often wrapped heated stones in cloth and placed them around the tub to warm the air slightly. You've seen these stones, warm beds, hands, and feet, but warming a room is an entirely different challenge. The stones help, but they can't transform the space. The servant lifts one and shows you the scorch mark it once left on a wooden stand. You smile, realizing winter makes every warm object work overtime. You glance around the room. There's no sign of pipes or plumbing. Everything is manual. Water must be fetched, heated, carried, poured. When the bath is done, the tub must be emptied the same way. You begin to understand why full baths were rare in winter, and why people relied more on partial washing hands, face, neck, feet done near fires, or with warmed cloths rather than full immersion. A bowl of lavender water sits on a shelf, frozen lightly on top. The servant cracks the thin ice with her finger, smiling at your shocked expression. She gestures that this scented water is used to freshen cloths for wiping skin. Even in the cold, people cared about smell, comfort, and grooming. Lavender, rosemary, or mint-infused water helped people feel clean, even when they couldn't risk a full bath. You follow the servant to another chamber where laundry is being handled. Steam rises from a large basin, where linens are being washed in water warmed near the kitchen. The women working here have rolled their sleeves high, their hands red from alternating heat and cold. They laugh as they scrub, breath misting with every exhale. A bundle of sheets crackles as one pulls them from the frost and lays them near the steaming tub to thaw. You watch them work and realize cleanliness wasn't ignored just because winter made it harder. People found ways, small ways, deliberate ways, to keep themselves and their homes bearable. Bathing once a week might be impossible, but wiping down with warm cloths every evening was achievable. Washing hair in winter was done only occasionally, near the hearth, with towels warmed beforehand. You learn quickly why medieval hats and caps were beloved winter accessories. not because people wanted to hide, but because the head is the hardest part to wash without freezing. Another servant shows you a curious object, a small, shallow brass basin with a curved edge. It's for shaving. You picture a man sitting close to the fire while someone pours warm water into this dish. Shaving in winter becomes a ritual of patience, hands warmed in cloths, blade heated slightly, steam rising from water. Every step slows down because cold metal on skin is not something to joke about. As you move deeper through the service rooms, you notice a pile of soaps, hard blocks that smell faintly of tallow, ash, and herbs. They're precious in winter, easily drying and cracking in the cold. A worker shows you a trick. They warm the soap near the hearth before using it, softening its edge so it lathers better. Without warmth, it barely works. These details give you a fuller picture. People weren't bathing rarely because they didn't care. They were bathing rarely because winter required negotiation. It demanded planning, labor, cooperation, and time. Everyone kept clean enough to remain healthy and comfortable, but nobody wasted heat or risked chills by washing carelessly. You return to the bath chamber and notice something charming in its simplicity, a wooden bench positioned near the tub. The servant taps it and demonstrates how someone might sit wrapped in a blanket while a helper washed their feet in a basin of warm water. This small ritual, warm feet, warm cloths, slow cleansing was probably more common than full bathing. It's the kind of intimate, practical care that doesn't show up in epic tales but shapes daily life. Some families use scented oils in winter instead of water-based washing. A little oil warmed by hand and rubbed onto skin, cleared dirt and protected against dry, cold air. You try a small dab from a wooden pot. It smells of rosemary and feels soothing on your chilled knuckles. Winter skin cracks easily. Oiling helps. People understood that long before dermatologists existed. There's also a long-standing question among scholars about how often medieval people, especially nobles, actually bathed during winter. Some argue baths were more frequent than stereotypes suggest, citing detailed household accounts. Others argue winter drastically reduced bathing opportunities even for the wealthy. Standing in this cold chamber, seeing the enormous effort required just to prepare one bath, you feel the answer lies between the extremes. People washed enough to avoid discomfort and illness, but rarely enough that it felt like an event. On your way out, you see a girl carefully warming a cloth by the small hearth that has finally been lit. She folded it several times and presses it against her face with a sigh so content it almost makes you jealous. You understand the beauty of small comforts now. A warm cloth, a dab of oil, clean hands, the feeling of being slightly less burdened by winter. As you step back into the corridor, the air tightens again around your cheeks, but something has changed. You're no longer thinking of winter as simply cold or punishing. You're seeing it as a constant negotiation, a balance between warmth and water, between comfort and practicality, between what the body needs and what the season allows. You walk away with the quiet knowledge that in a castle like this, cleanliness was not a luxury. It was an act of stubbornness, a small, steady refusal to let winter decide everything. You leave the chilly bathing chamber and descend a staircase that creaks under your boots, thinking about warm cloths and cautious washing. As you turn a corner, the castle opens into a long gallery lined with narrow windows. The cold slips in like a sly guest, brushing your cheeks. Ahead, you see movement servants carrying cushions, a steward checking ledgers, a noblewoman speaking quietly with an attendant. Something shifts in the atmosphere, a subtle reminder that not everyone in this place experiences winter in the same way. You step into a larger solar, a private upper room warmed by late morning light filtering through small panes of clouded glass. The moment you cross the threshold, you feel it. The air is noticeably softer. Not warm, exactly, but gentler. Someone has already lit a small hearth here, and its glow pushes back the cold with more confidence than in the public hall. The thick tapestries lining the walls are brighter, the cushions plumper, the rugs denser. You can feel status in the very temperature. A noblewoman sits near the hearth, writing on a wax tablet with a stylus. Her posture is relaxed, her cloak lined with fur, her shoes soft with rabbit skin. She moves with the calm certainty of someone who will never have to fetch her own firewood. The servant standing behind her adjusts the fire by adding a carefully dried log, one chosen from the best stack. Nothing in this room burns damp, nothing smokes unnecessarily. Winter bends differently around people like her. When she notices you, she gives a small nod. Her breath doesn't fog in the air as sharply as yours does. She is close enough to heat that her fingers stay flexible, her shoulders loose. Her face has that look of someone who endures winter, yes, but doesn't wrestle with it. Her warmth is curated for her. The steward approaches her with a ledger and bows slightly. You catch fragments of the conversation: fuel allocations, textile repairs, meal distributions. His voice is brisk, efficient. He discusses how much firewood the Great Hall may consume today, how many torches must be replaced, which tapestries need rehanging. These decisions affect everyone, yet the noblewoman discusses them, wrapped in a warmth that most in the castle will never feel. You glance toward the corner where a maid works quietly, her fingers red from the cold. She's mending a tear in a thick mantle, working fast to keep the needle from turning her fingertips numb. She's close to the hearth, but not close enough. For her, warmth is something fought for, not arranged. It strikes you how winter draws class lines more visibly than any summer day ever could. The air itself behaves differently depending on who occupies a space. A servant enters carrying a copper basin of warm water. The noblewoman dips her hands in, drying them with a fine cloth. Just a few chambers away, other workers wash with cold water, or none at all. Warmth here is selective, distributed according to hierarchy as much as necessity. You move through the solar and notice the thickness of the rugs underfoot. They're not ordinary. They're dense, well-kept, and strategically placed. Here, the cold floor becomes a manageable inconvenience, not a daily enemy. Cushions are set near the best spots, as if warmth has been mapped and charted. A young page enters the room with a tray of warm spiced ale. He offers you some. You accept and take a slow sip. It warms your throat, making you sigh despite yourself. You see immediately that such luxuries with spice, with heat, with time to prepare, belong primarily to those who govern the household. The workers you passed earlier drink broth when they're lucky. In the far corner, an elderly man sits in a padded chair. His cloak is lined with thick fur and fastened with a decorative clasp. He holds his hands over a small table brazier, enjoying its steady heat. Age makes winter harsher, but his position ensures he gets more warmth than others. You can see it in his cheeks, no longer blue with cold like the stable boys. He nods at you, his eyes soft. It's clear he has survived many winters, each one eased by access to private fires. You walk through a side door where another scene unfolds. Two servants work in a room with only a modest brazier, barely enough to take the bite out of the air. Their breath clouds, almost constantly. Their fingers work fast, sewing and folding linens, mending holes in winter garments. They smile at each other, but their movements betray how cold they are. You stand there for only moments before your shoulders tense, yet they remain for hours. A handful of castle staff may sleep near hanging tapestries or close to the kitchen hearth, finding warmth where they can. Many sleep in small shared quarters, huddling together under whatever blankets or cloaks they have. The noble family, however, retires to chambers with thicker curtains, better fires, and bed warmers, dedicated solely to them. You climb a set of stairs to the uppermost rooms. These spaces are surprisingly cold. Noble or not, no one escapes winter entirely up here. Yet even here, differences show. The ladies' chamber has 2 layers of curtains at the window, thick as cloaks. The lord's room has an elaborate wooden canopy over the bed to trap heat. Even the chairs are padded thicker. Small details accumulate into a life that endures winter more gently. This difference in lived warmth is partly why medieval writers often describe noble winters far more softly than the common experience. They write of snowy walks, hearthside tales, feasts, furs. Meanwhile, elsewhere within the same walls, workers stiffen their fingers with cold tasks, fires few and far between. Some researchers note that wealthier residents may have had access to more heated rooms, more frequent warm meals, and better winter gear, while the majority lived on the edge of discomfort every day. Others argue that even nobles felt the bite of winter because no castle could hold heat evenly or reliably. Both interpretations make sense as you move from room to room. You can feel the spectrum of cold. People here inhabit layers of winter, not one uniform season. Warmth moves along lines of rank, duty, age, gender, and proximity to fire. You descend again to the hall, crossing through the grand doorway where the noblewoman had stood earlier. The air here is cooler. Your shoulders react immediately. You watch a servant sweep rushes from the floor, her steps quick, her breath visible. She pauses only when the steward calls her, and even then, she keeps shifting her weight from foot to stay warm. You sit near the hearth and let the knowledge settle. Winter here is not shared equally. It never was. Warmth is a privilege, a resource, a social marker. Some people fight the cold, others negotiate with it. A few command it from a cushioned chair. You lean closer to the fire, drawing what comfort you can. The flames flicker warmly, but even they seem to understand the hierarchy. They reach farther into some rooms than others. Yet despite the inequality, you feel something else too. The shared struggle of winter still binds everyone in the castle. From noble to stable hand, everyone wakes under the same frozen sky. Everyone feels the cold clawing at their doorstep. Everyone prays, perhaps silently, for just one more day of manageable chill. And you, sitting between these worlds, feel the castle breathe around you, warm in places, cold in others, shaped by human choices and human limits. This fortress does not hold winter back equally, but it holds winter back enough. You leave the solar with a new awareness of how warmth follows status like a shadow. But as you descend a side stairwell toward the inner chambers, you begin to notice a different pattern woven through winter life in the castle. A quieter one, a softer one. You start seeing the people whose hands keep the whole place alive from behind the scenes, even when their own fingers are cracked from cold. You step into a warm-smelling room where women are bent over long tables, sorting wool, carding fibers, spinning thread. Their movements are steady and practiced. The air isn't exactly warm, but it's warm enough compared to the stone corridors. A brazier glows faintly in the corner, casting soft light across piles of wool that look like captured clouds. The women here are talking in low voices. You can't follow the words, but you can feel the rhythm of them. Winter tasks make their own kind of companionship. A pair of them laugh softly whenever the draft sneaks in under the door and lifts the wool tufts into the air like snow. One smooths the fibers with a long, patient stroke, humming a tune that keeps time with her work. Wool is a winter lifeline. It becomes cloaks, blankets, hoods, mittens. It wraps babies, lines, boots, and becomes the heart of every bed curtain. And here, you see how much of that work falls into the hands of women. Their labor doesn't roar like the kitchen hearth or echo like the smithy. It whispers through thread and cloth, but the castle depends on it just as much as on fire. A girl sits near the corner, mending a tear in a sleeve. She bites the thread to shorten it, then threads her needle with hands that are trembling slightly from the cold. Every few minutes, she holds her palms near the brazier, rubs them together, and returns to her task. You sit beside her for a moment, watching her fingers move quickly and with surprising grace. "Cold makes you work faster," she says in her own language, lightly tapping her temple to show she's learned to outwit winter through speed. The truth sinks in. Every garment you've worn here, every blanket you've wrapped yourself in, every cloak swaying from a noble shoulder, someone in a room like this made it, repaired it, or washed it. Winter creates endless chores, and most of them fall to the women of the household. You move on, into a narrower room, filled with baskets of root vegetables and dried herbs. A pair of women sit cross-legged on the floor, slicing leeks for tomorrow's stew. Their knives are quick, their bodies close together for warmth. One shakes her head at the cold draft slipping under the door, then folds her legs closer to her chest, pulling her cloak tight. They chat the entire time, sharing little jokes in the midst of work that is steady, almost meditative. A pot of warm water steams gently nearby, used to soften stiff vegetables before cooking. One woman plunges her hands in for a moment, sighing as the heat touches her skin. Her sigh says everything. Winter in a castle is a long negotiation between hands and cold. You find another group of women in the laundry space, working over buckets of lukewarm water. The air is damp, carrying the scent of lye soap and wet cloth. Their sleeves are rolled up, exposing red, chapped forearms. Wash days in winter are grueling. Water cools quickly. Cloth freezes on contact with outdoor air, and wet hands stiffen fast. They wring out linens with practiced determination, talking about how many blankets still need cleaning before night falls. When one woman hands another a warmed towel to dry her hands, the gesture feels almost ceremonial. Then there are the women tending the animals you visited earlier. You return briefly to the shed and see a shepherdess checking every sheep's hooves, making sure none stepped on ice that cracked too sharply. She rubs a ewe's leg with a piece of wool to bring the warmth back. Her cheeks are nearly purple from cold, but her hands remain gentle. She coos and murmurs to the animals, her voice low and soothing, as though she's warming them with sound alone. Women feed chickens before dawn, gather eggs in freezing mornings, milk cows while their fingers stiffen, and clean stalls while frost forms on the inside of the wooden doors. Winter gives them no pause. Every chore must be done regardless of weather. In a high, narrow passage, you encounter two women carrying heavy baskets of rushes to lay fresh mats in the great hall. Their steps are deliberate, shoulders bent. Laying rushes is essential winter work, and they do it with the same steady respect they give to food or clothing. They kneel on cold stone, spreading the bundles evenly, their breath puffing with each motion. When they finish, they sit for a moment to catch their breath, exchanging smiles like soldiers taking a brief rest. You turn a corner and nearly collide with a woman hauling a basket of logs toward a noble's chamber. The load is heavy, but she moves quickly. Logs for the elite chambers must be the best, drier, heavier, slower burning. She carries warmth to someone else's room, while her own quarters will likely rely on a few thin embers and shared blankets. Yet she hums a tune as she walks, a winter work song, a rhythm to move her feet. Inside the Lord's chamber, you watch two women prepare the bed for the evening, shaking out blankets, warming stones, adjusting curtains so drafts won't find the sleeper. One tucks a tiny pouch of herbs between the mattress layers to keep the smell fresh. She has probably done this thousands of times. Her motions are gentle, almost caring. Winter is harsher for everyone, but women carry part of it through rituals that make cold nights slightly more bearable. Some scholars debate how much of the castle's winter management fell specifically to women. Some argue it was nearly all domestic, food, textile, and animal care tasks that become heavier in winter. Others suggest that in many castles, winter blurred gender roles out of necessity, with anyone who could carry a log or stir a pot joining the effort. The evidence varies by region and century, but as you observe these routines, you feel the truth leaning towards something in between. Winter squeezes everyone, but it squeezes women most consistently. You notice one last detail before leaving the chamber: a set of meticulously folded linens adorned with simple embroidery. A woman sits beside them, resting her needle. She's added small flowers in the corners, not essential, but beautiful in a season that erases color. Even in winter hardship, creativity finds a way. You step out of the room and follow a corridor back toward the hall. The cold reaches for you again, sharp and insistent. But today you feel something new threaded through it. You feel the strength behind the scenes, the hands that mend, the hands that warm, the hands that scrape, wash, fold, spin, stitch, and tend. Winter in a castle isn't just endured by fire or stone, it's endured by people, especially women working quietly, tirelessly, invisibly, every hour of every short day. And as you return to the hall, you find yourself wrapped not just in your cloak, but in gratitude for their unseen warmth. You make your way back toward the hall, but before you reach it, a soft sound stops you, a muffled cough behind a wooden door. You push it open gently and find a small chamber meant for families of lower-ranking workers. The air is cold enough that your breath shows instantly, yet the room hums with life. A young child sits wrapped in a wool blanket near a brazier that glows faintly. An older woman, perhaps the child's grandmother, rubs the little one's hands between her own, as if coaxing warmth from thin air. You step inside quietly, and the woman gives you a tired smile. It's a smile you've seen on many faces in this castle, the winter smile, the one that says there is work to do, and worry to hold, and very little heat to help with either. Children and elders are the most vulnerable in winter. The castle walls may stand strong, but bodies do not have the same luxury. Age bends them toward cold more quickly. A toddler toddles toward you, bundled in so many layers she looks like a ball of cloth with a face. Her cheeks are flushed pink from cold and effort. She clings to a wooden toy, nothing more than carved scraps tied with string, but it keeps her moving, and moving is warmth. Children here don't walk. They bounce, wiggle, squirm, and run circles around the cold that nips at their heels. A mother sits nearby with an infant tucked under her cloak, held close to her chest. The cloak balloons in shape, but when she shifts it for a moment, you see the baby nestled inside like a small, warm treasure. Body heat is the most reliable warmth there is. In this world, babies are often kept with their mothers or older siblings day and night, sharing constant heat. The mother dips her fingers into a tiny pot of oil herbal, infused with something sharp and green, then rubs the baby's feet gently. The child sighs, half asleep, half dreaming. Cold tends to creep into extremities first. She's protecting the feet now so she doesn't have to worry about a deeper chill later. A servant enters carrying a small jug of warmed milk. The smell is faintly sweet, and the children's eyes follow her eagerly. She pours a little into wooden cups, and the older kids drink greedily. Warm liquids are not treats here. They are medicine. They warm stomachs and steady spirits, especially for growing bodies and aging ones. You join them as the grandmother adjusts a quilt over her knees. When she shifts, you notice how stiffly she moves. Winter is cruel to joints. Her fingers look swollen, her knuckles tight. She has wrapped a length of soft wool around her wrists, not decoration, but relief. Older bodies trap less heat, lose it faster, and recover more slowly. They need warmth from many directions: food, fire, fabrics, family. She nods toward the brazier as if apologizing for its weakness. The coals inside are thin, no more than a dim blush of red. Better brazier fuel is used elsewhere in the castle, higher status rooms, spaces where decisions are made or nobles sleep. Here, they make do with leftover embers, shared blankets, and each other's presence. A boy enters the room carrying a fur-lined hood too large for him. He must have borrowed it or inherited it. He tosses it playfully at his younger sister, and she giggles as it falls over her head like a cavern. She pulls it off and hugs it to her chest. Even play has winter logic here. Furs become toys, but also warmth worn thin by laughter. You notice something else. Children rarely sit still for long. Even in this cold room, they're wiggling, tapping their feet, playing games with tiny pebbles, shaking rushes onto the floor. Their movement isn't just youthful energy, it's survival. If they stop, the cold claims space inside their bodies. In a corner, an elderly man sits hunched over a small stool. He wears a hood indoors, something younger adults rarely do unless it's especially frigid. His beard is silvered with age and dusted lightly with frost. He holds his hands close to a covered pot that must contain a heated brick or stone. Every few minutes, he lifts it slightly and breathes a sigh of relief. He is using the same winter tricks as children, but with less energy and more need. Someone drapes an extra blanket around his shoulders, and he pats their hand with gratitude. Winter softens even the sternest personalities. Everyone becomes tender when the cold creeps too close. You follow a narrow hall toward another family chamber. Inside, two teenagers sit near a shuttered window, stitching thick mittens from scraps of old wool. Their mother supervises patiently while mending a torn sleeve. They all share one small, fireless lamp for light. Their fingers move with practiced coordination despite numbing cold. You touch the wool they're using. It's coarse, uneven, but warm. They make mittens not just for themselves but for younger siblings, for neighbors in the castle, for anyone who needs them. Winter creates long chains of care hands, keeping other hands alive. One girl shows you how she stuffs dried moss between layers of wool to add insulation. It's a rural trick brought into castle life, one you wouldn't notice unless someone explained it. It makes the mittens thicker and warmer. You admire her ingenuity, born from necessity. Nearby, a grandmother tells a story to distract the children from the cold, her voice low and melodic. The tale involves a fox, a winter storm, and a clever girl who steals warmth from the wind. The children lean in, forgetting for a moment that their toes sting. Stories are as much medicine as warm broth. There is ongoing debate among historians about just how harsh winter life was for children and elders in castles. Some argue they were relatively protected, shielded by communal structures and consistent meals. Others claim the cold was relentless, that illness and fatigue struck oldest and youngest hardest, even within noble households. Observing the different chambers, you can see truth in both views. Children laugh, but their noses are red and runny. Elders smile, but their hands tremble. Winter is manageable, but only barely and only through constant vigilance. You move into the corridor again and notice an older woman leading a child toward the kitchen to warm up. The child's small hand vanishes in her larger one. You feel a warmth bloom in your chest at the sight. Winter encourages tenderness. Not soft, fragile tenderness, sturdy tenderness, the kind that keeps people alive. Back in the hall, you sit for a moment near the fire. Around you, adults walk briskly, absorbed in duty. But at the edges of the room, elders sit wrapped in blankets, and children huddle near parents. Those who can move keep the cold at bay through action. Those who cannot rely on others to share their heat. You realize something profound then. Winter in a medieval castle doesn't just test architecture or fuel supplies. It tests relationships. It reveals who looks after who carries the firewood for who slips extra blankets under whose door. Even strength here is shared. The fire beside you crackles softly. A child laughs from somewhere behind you. An old man coughs gently. The castle breathes around them, through them, because of them. Winter shows its sharpest teeth to the youngest and the oldest. but it also shows its gentlest side in the way people gather to protect them. You rise from the hall bench with a slow stretch, feeling the warmth slip away the moment you leave the hearth's orbit. The corridor ahead is dimmer, rougher, quieter, and as you walk, you begin to sense another presence woven through winter life. Here, not a person, not exactly, but something that clings to the castle alongside the cold. Illness. Winter invites it like an old acquaintance, not always dramatic, not always deadly, but always near. You pass a narrow chamber where a woman sits with her head bowed, wrapped in a cloak that seems too thin for her shivering. Another servant kneels beside her, rubbing her back gently. Her cough is soft but persistent, the kind that burrows deep and lingers. You feel the chill in the room trying to settle into your own lungs, and you take a slow breath through your nose. Colds, fevers, chest sickness, these whisper through castles every winter, not because medieval people were careless, but because everything here conspires to make illness easier. Drafts slice under doors. Smoke irritates lungs. Bedding rarely dries fully. People huddle together near fires, sharing warmth and breath in equal measure. You move through the doorway and find a small basin of water warming over a weak flame. A servant dips a cloth, wrings it out, and presses it to the sick woman's forehead. The touch is gentle. Winter forces gentleness on people, whether they meant to offer it or not. You step back into the corridor and glance into another room, where a boy sits on a stool with his foot propped up. His toes are purple with cold, wrapped in cloths warmed awkwardly near a candle. A guard is massaging warmth into the child's foot, murmuring reassurance. Frostbite isn't common in a well-run castle, yet the threat is always hovering at the edge of every long watch, every icy floor, every poorly insulated chamber. The boy winces, but he's lucky circulation is returning. A healer arrives moments later, carrying a small pouch of herbs. She kneels and unwraps the cloth. Her hands move with practiced care. Inside her pouch are dried leaves and roots, something that smells like thyme, something sharper like feverfew, something resinous like pine. She crushes a pinch and mixes it with warm water, creating a paste she gently applies to the injured skin. You watch her and realize that winter healing is just as much about heat as herbs. Warm compresses, heated stones wrapped in cloth, warm drinks, warmed salves. The healer's tools glow faintly from sitting near a fire before she used them. Cold medicine doesn't work unless it has warmth to carry it. She glances up at you and gives a small shake of her head, the universal sign that this child will need rest and luck. When she finishes, she wraps his foot in wool and instructs him to stay near a fire. He nods solemnly, like he's been handed a winter oath. You leave the room softly and head toward the corner chamber the steward mentioned earlier, the one reserved for minor injuries and ailments. When you enter, the air is warm but heavy. A brazier burns low in the center. The faint smell of boiled herbs lingers like a ghost. Several pallets line the walls. On one pallet, a man lies bundled beneath layers of wool, his breath shallow. A fever clings to his cheeks in flushes. A woman sits beside him, spooning a warm broth into his mouth little by little. He sips, swallows, slips back into sleep. Winter fevers often begin this way, quiet, almost polite, then sharpen their claws when night falls. The healer moves from patient to patient with slow efficiency. She checks pulses using her fingertips, lifts eyelids gently, listens to breathing by leaning close. Winter coughs can deepen into deadly lung sickness if ignored, so she listens for that low rattle no one wants to hear. She prepares a drink by crushing dried berries, mixing them with warm water. The liquid is dark and thin, but the patient receiving it drinks gratefully. Warmth from inside is sometimes the only medicine a medieval winter can consistently offer. You wander toward a shelf lined with simple remedies, woven cloth bundles filled with herbs, jars of tallow salve, strips of linen for wrapping joints, a pot of something that smells strongly medicinal mustard, perhaps used to draw heat into aching limbs. Another jar holds goose grease, often rubbed onto chests to ease coughing. You rub a bit between your fingers and feel how quickly it softens in the warmth of your skin. Next to these sits a small pot of honey. It gleams golden even in dim light. Honey is medicine here, mixed with herbs, smeared on cracked skin, dissolved into warm drinks. Sweetness is rare in winter, but honey is both nourishment and healing. A child nearby has a wool scarf wrapped around her neck, knotted in a particular way. Her mother explains with gestures that the scarf has been warmed near a fire and sprinkled lightly with crushed mint leaves. The heat loosens the throat, the scent clears the airways. You watch the child inhale slowly, shoulders relaxing. You understand then that medieval healing is a blend of practicality and intuition. As you move through the corridor, a guard limps past you, wincing as he puts weight on his foot. His boot sole is cracked from frost. He removes it to reveal blistered skin. Before the healer can reach him, another guard offers a warmed cloth. No words, just hands helping hands. Winter injuries create a quiet fraternity among those who spend long hours outdoors. Down another hall, you find the chapel, a place not just for prayer, but for sick bodies seeking quiet. A woman sits praying for her elderly father, her hands trembling. The father sits slumped in a cushioned chair, wrapped in blankets. His breath is labored, each inhale slightly colder than the last. She presses a warm cup into his hands, whispering something soft. Winter illness makes faith feel closer, even to those who usually wave it away. Some scholars argue that medieval people saw winter illness mainly as a spiritual imbalance, something influenced by celestial forces, divine displeasure, or humoral misalignment. Others insist that practical experience taught them far more than we credit about drafts causing chills, about the need for warm food and careful rest, about the dangers of smoke-filled rooms. Watching this healer work, you sense truth in both ideas. She gives herbs with one hand and murmured blessings with the other. Healing here is both science and story. You walk deeper into the cold wing, following the sound of sniffles. In one small chamber, 3 children sit huddled together under a blanket. One has a runny nose, one a sore throat, one a quiet cough. Their older sister holds a cup of warm broth and passes it between them. Their mother checks their foreheads, frowning but determined. She knows winter sickness spreads quickly, especially among the young. Yet despite the threat, there is resilience in all of them. Children recover fast. Elders endure with patience. Adults push through. They all keep moving because winter won't stop for them. On your way back to the hall, you pause by the window slit. Outside, frost sparkles on the courtyard stones. You breathe in deeply. The air is cold but clean. Winter sharpens everything: sounds, smells, fears, and gratitude. You return to the warmth of the hearth where people gather. Some cough softly, some wince at aches, some sip warm drinks. All of them share heat and presence in a way that feels deeply human. Winter always brings illness, but winter also brings care. And in this castle, surrounded by stone and snow, tenderness becomes its own healing fire. You sit for a moment by the hall fire, letting your hands hover in the dancing glow, but the warmth drifts only so far. Beyond its reach, winter still shapes every movement in the castle. And as evening nears, something else begins to stir, something quieter than the bustle of chores, softer than the murmur of illness, older than the castle itself. Ritual. Life here is built around rhythms, but winter rhythms feel almost ceremonial. You stand and follow a small group of servants carrying candles toward the chapel. Their steps echo against stone, and you feel the temperature drop with every stride. Yet the mood changes too. The cold seems less intrusive, more like part of the setting. Winter is harsh, yes, but it has its own traditions, its own ways of being acknowledged. Inside the chapel, the air is chilly enough to make your breath visible, but dozens of candles cast a golden shimmer that softens the edges. Their light flickers against wooden beams and simple icons. The room smells of wax and evergreen branches, sprigs tucked into corners as a winter symbol of hope, or maybe just because greenery makes the space feel less barren. A priest stands at the front, preparing for an evening prayer. His voice is low, but it carries through the stillness. He lights the last candle on the altar, hands steady despite the cold. You can see his breath fog, but he doesn't let it distract him. Winter strengthens rituals like this. People gather not simply for devotion, but for the comfort of gathered breath, shared purpose, and the brief illusion that the season cannot touch them while they stand together. A few castle workers slip into benches near the back. Some rub their hands to bring life back to their fingers. Others bow their heads in gratitude for surviving another cold day. Even the noblewoman from earlier arrives with her attendants, her fur-lined cloak trailing behind her. In winter, hierarchy doesn't vanish, but it loosens. Everyone wants warmth, mercy, endurance. As the prayer begins, you close your eyes for a moment. The words are steady, spoken in a cadence that feels older than the walls around you. The chant rises and falls like a calm wind. There's something in it, an acknowledgement of the season's brutality, a request for protection, and a quiet promise that longer days will return. After the prayer ends, The priest walks through the room, sprinkling water and crushed herbs, releasing a bright aroma. It feels symbolic, but not empty. Rituals like this remind people that winter is not just cold, it is a season to be marked, navigated, and survived. When you step out of the chapel, dusk has settled firmly over the castle. The air is iron cold, still and heavy. Workers move more quickly now, trying to finish tasks before night clamps down. And this is when you notice the second kind of winter ritual: feasting. Not everyday feasting, those meals are practical, purposeful. This is seasonal feasting. In the great hall, servants are arranging benches, laying out thick wooden plates, stacking bread, slicing cheese, and carrying in pots of hot stew. Tonight is a winter supper marking the midpoint of the cold season, a moment when the household acknowledges how far they've come and how far they still have to go. People gather slowly, still wrapped in heavy clothing despite the roaring fire. The hall fills with voices, gentle laughter, the faint clatter of dishes, the shuffling of boots on rushes. You take a seat near a group of servants who gesture for you to join them. You accept, grateful for the warmth of companionship. Bowls are filled with pottage richened for the occasion. Bread is passed. A jug of ale travels from hand to hand. Even a dish of dried fruit appears at the head table, a rare treat saved for nights like this. Winter feasts don't overflow with luxury, but they overflow with meaning. As people eat, you hear stories shared across the benches, tales of hunts held in winters long past, remembrances of difficult years when snowstorms lasted weeks, jokes about frozen boots, stubborn fires, and that one horse who refuses to stand still for its blanket. Each story warms the room a little more. One older servant speaks about a tradition from her village, lighting a bundle of dried herbs at the household threshold to invite good fortune until spring. Another mentions how, in some regions, families parade through the snow with lanterns to call back the sun. You realize winter rituals vary across place and people, but they all share the same heartbeat: hope. A trio of musicians begins to play a slow, warm melody on pipes and a small drum. The sound glides through the hall like a ray of light. Even the coldest corners seem to soften. You watch children sway to the rhythm, elders tap rhythmically with their fingers, and workers lean back with eyes half closed. You listen closely and realize the melody is about winter itself, about endurance, about dim days and bright fires. The notes rise and fall like the arc of a season. After supper, the hall dims, leaving only the hearth and a few lanterns. People remain seated, reluctant to face the cold outside this room. Someone begins to tell a story, a winter tale about wolves in the dark forest, and a girl who finds her way home by following the glow of embers. The hall grows quiet, spellbound. Winter stories are older than any castle, and are told not just to pass time, but to remind listeners that light always finds its way through darkness. When the tale ends, a few people murmur a quiet blessing. Some traditions have roots no one can fully trace, words passed down like heirlooms, worn smooth by centuries of speakers. There is a long-standing discussion among historians about whether medieval winter rituals were primarily spiritual, practical, or social in nature. Some say they were direct appeals for protection, tied to religious calendars. Others see them as morale-boosting gatherings to endure seasonal hardship. The truth feels layered as you sit here. These rituals are part prayer, part habit, part comfort, part defiance. They make winter feel smaller, even when it is vast. Eventually, people stand and begin drifting toward their chambers. Tapestries sway slightly as cold sneaks in through the outer door. You instinctively draw your cloak tighter. Before you leave the hall, you notice a final ritual, one so simple you almost miss it. A servant places a single, small candle in the window slit, shielding it from the draught with her hand until it steadies. The flame glows faintly against the night beyond. A light for those still working. A light for those coming in late. A light to remind winter that it hasn't won. You walk away slowly, warmed not just by fire but by ritual, tradition, and the knowledge that even in the heart of winter, people shape moments of meaning like tiny candles in a world of frost. Morning arrives with a different kind of cold, sharp, crystalline, almost metallic. You step out into the corridor and feel it instantly. But something else catches your attention too. Voices, accents, textures of language you haven't heard inside these walls. Travelers, guests, people from distant regions who bring not just news or trade, but the winter habits of their homelands. The castle feels bigger today, as if winter itself has widened to include places far beyond these stone walls. As you walk toward the great hall, you see a man shrugging out of a heavy cloak, so thick it looks almost stiff. The fabric is dark, tightly woven, trimmed with fur in a style unfamiliar to this region. He greets the steward with a nod, then pulls off his gloves and tucks them into his belt. The gloves are made of layered wool and leather sewn together in a pattern you haven't seen before, clearly built for a harsher climate. You realize this is an opportunity to understand how different parts of medieval Europe fought the cold, each with their own strategies. A woman from a warmer southern land sits by the hearth, warming her hands and marveling at the size of the fire. Her cloak is thinner, dyed in bright colors, better suited for mild winters than bitter northern nights. She laughs softly when someone hands her a thicker wool wrap, pulling it gratefully around her shoulders. You sit beside her, and she speaks with animated gestures about winters in her home cold. Yes, but not punishing. Houses built with sun and wind in mind, not with stone that hoards cold like treasure. You imagine her winter's fires for cooking rather than heating, blankets instead of bed curtains, days when snow is a curiosity rather than a threat. Across the room, a northern traveller watches the scene with a faint smile, perhaps amused by how lightly she speaks of winter. He's from a land where frost bites earlier and harder. His boots are wrapped with extra layers of wool, tied with strips of leather. His cloak has a hood that practically envelops his face. When he sits near the fire, he still does not remove it entirely. He tells a few gathered servants about winters in the far north, about snow so deep it swallows fences, about winds that scrape heat from the skin, about nights so long that fire becomes a companion rather than a tool. You picture heavy log halls with low ceilings designed to trap heat, thick fur bed coverings, and fires that burn through the dark hours like small suns. The image makes this stone castle feel almost mild in comparison. You follow the conversation as more guests join in. A merchant from the Low Countries describes how people angle their houses so harsh winds slide past instead of hitting broad walls. He explains the use of thick shutters packed with straw and how canals freeze solid enough to become winter roads. His gestures paint a picture of a world where cold shapes architecture as much as comfort. Nearby, a woman from the Iberian Peninsula runs her fingers through a tapestry, marveling at how thick it is. She speaks of winters where the cold settles in mountain towns, but coastal breezes keep nights far more forgiving. She mentions clay braziers filled with embers, carried from room to room, warming hands and feet in homes made of sun-baked stone. Her voice warms at the memory. You sense how every region's winter knowledge reflects its climate. No single Europe exists in these stories, only many Europes, each with its own dialogue between humans and cold. A servant brings in a jug of warm ale, and the conversation shifts to fuel. The northern traveller mentions birch and pine, how they burn bright and fast in his homeland. A guest from Italy laughs and counters with olive wood, which burns slow and steady but smells different. A man from the eastern regions describes peat beds so deep they seem endless, and how families stack peat bricks carefully, knowing they smoulder long after wood has given up. You absorb these differences like a cold body absorbs heat. Winter is universal, yet deeply local. As the group drifts apart, you wander toward the courtyard, where a visitor from Scotland shows a guard how his cloak fastens with a large wooden pin rather than a metal clasp. Metal freezes cruelly against the skin, he explains. His cloak is woven in tight checks of blue and brown, and he wears it wrapped over one shoulder in a way that turns cloth into architecture. Windproof, water-resistant, flexible, a tool as much as clothing. Then you meet a traveller from the Alps. His boots are stuffed with dried straw for insulation. He carries a hood lined with sheepskin so thick it keeps frost off his eyebrows, even in mountain passes. He describes how alpine houses use carved wooden shutters and stacked stones that retain what little heat the sun gives. He even mentions that in deep winter, people sleep in lofts above barns, so animal heat drifts upward. You remember the stable warmth you felt earlier and nod knowingly. Even in castles, that principle survives in hidden corners. A merchant from the eastern Baltic region shows you a small leather pouch filled with dried juniper berries. He crushes one between his fingers and holds it near your nose. Sharp, resinous, almost medicinal. In his homeland, these berries are tossed onto fire coals to scent rooms and clear winter air, a practice both practical and symbolic. The smell reminds you of pine forests and frozen seas. You step back inside as dusk begins to settle, and another group of visitors arrives, carrying fur-lined cloaks, bleached by bright sunlight, a sign of high altitudes or reflective snowfields. They hang them carefully to dry, explaining that melting snow trapped in fur can freeze again if not shaken out immediately. You listen to their talk of snow dome shelters carved for temporary warmth, of fire pits dug deep into frost, of carrying embers in closed containers during long journeys. Their stories make Castle Cold seem tame in comparison. And through all these voices, all these accents, all these winter habits, you notice a pattern. Everyone respects the cold, but no two people treat it exactly the same. Winter wisdom travels with them, stitched into cloaks, tucked into boots, simmered into meals, murmured in stories. Some researchers note that medieval Europe's winter strategies varied wildly by region, architecture, shaped by local climate, clothing tailored to specific winds, food chosen for the particular cold a community faced. Others argue that trade and travel spread ideas more widely than we assume, letting winter knowledge migrate across borders. Standing here among these travelers, hearing them exchange tricks and laugh at one another's climates, you feel how fluid that knowledge actually is. You return to the hall, where the foreign guests gather near the fire. They lift cups, share bread, compare scars earned from winters unlike this one. Even the differences between them create warmth of their own. The noblewoman smiles as she listens. The steward scribbles notes in his ledger, perhaps deciding which new winter trick to adopt for the castle. And you sit quietly, absorbing it all, the chill of stone behind you, the glow of fire in front of you, and voices from places where winter wears entirely different expressions. In this moment you understand, a castle's winter is only one winter among many. And tonight, with the hall filled by travelers exchanging their own cold weather genius, your world feels wider, older, and strangely warmer. The travelers' voices still echo in your ears as night deepens, but when dawn returns, the castle wakes to something heavier than stories. You step out into the courtyard and notice the air feels different, denser, sharper, as if the world has tightened. Frost clings to the stones in a thicker sheet than usual. Your breath doesn't drift gently the way it has all week. It bursts out in small clouds that hang in front of your face like ghosts. A stable hand rushes past you, muttering to himself. Another man curses softly as he tries to open a frozen latch. Someone else slips on the stairs, catching the railing just in time. The castle isn't merely cold today. It's brittle, and suddenly, the whispers you've heard over the past few days surface in your mind. This winter is deeper than expected, earlier, stranger. And then you remember what people in later centuries would call it, the beginning of a colder climate cycle, a shift historians now refer to with a quiet shiver, the Little Ice Age. You walk toward the battlements, boots crunching through frost so stiff it sounds like breaking pottery. At the top of the steps, a guard is staring over the landscape, his cloak wrapped tightly around him. When he sees you, he gestures outward, as if offering proof that the world has changed overnight. What you see makes your breath hitch. The fields are white, not with snow, but with thick hoarfrost. Trees glitter, stiff with ice. Even the river beyond the road has a crust forming along the edges, delicate as lace, but unmistakably solid. It is barely midwinter, yet the cold has tightened its grip with a sudden, merciless twist. The guard murmurs something about the winter 2 decades ago, when a similar cold snap froze the wells and killed half the vineyard. Another guard adds that her grandmother remembered a winter when birds dropped from trees overnight, frozen before they could wake. Stories ripple through the air like cautionary threads. Sudden, cold snaps are not just uncomfortable, they're dangerous. You descend again into the courtyard, and the cold follows you like a shadow. Everything moves slower. Water buckets have frozen completely. Men must break the surface ice with the blunt ends of tools. Animals stamp their hooves, uneasy. Even the castle dogs whine quietly. Huddling near doors they usually wander freely through. The kitchen, usually a refuge, feels frantic today. Cooks hover close to their fires, feeding them constantly, their faces bright with heat and worry. A pot of broth simmers with urgency, as if the kitchen understands instinctively that warm liquid will be needed more than usual. Someone opens the outer door for a moment, and a gust of icy wind sweeps through, making everyone flinch. Cold snaps like this invade even the warmest rooms. You watch as a cook wraps a cloth around her wrist. She burned herself slightly while rushing to adjust a pot. Winter fires are temperamental, sometimes flaring unexpectedly when fed too eagerly. But she doesn't slow down. She ladles broth into cups and hands them out to workers coming in from the courtyard, their faces stiff with cold. A shepherd bursts in next, frantic. The sheep huddle too close together, he says, bleating in distress. Their trough water froze solid. He grabs warm buckets from the kitchen and runs back outside. The desperation in his movements reminds you how fragile survival becomes when the temperature drops too fast. You follow him to the sheds. Inside, the animals are restless. Their breath fogs the air in thick white clouds. The shepherd pours warm water slowly into the trough, murmuring to calm them. One ewe is trembling. He checks her carefully and wraps extra straw around her legs. Animals know when winter changes from merely cold to perilous. You move toward the outer walls next, where workers are trying to break ice from the stone steps. One bangs a hammer lightly against the frost, careful not to crack the masonry beneath. Another sprinkles sand and ashes along the walkway for traction. You step carefully, it would take only one slip to turn an ankle or worse. Winter is a patient predator, and today it has sharpened its claws. As you return to the castle's interior, a child runs past you, clutching a blanket. His breath hitches, face red from the cold. He's carrying the blanket for his grandmother, who is struggling with the sudden shift in temperature. You quicken your pace and follow. Inside a dim chamber, the elderly woman sits near the brazier, trying to warm her hands. Her fingertips look pale, almost bluish. Her daughter kneels beside her, rubbing her feet gently with warm oil. A servant brings a heated stone wrapped in thick cloth and places it under the blankets at her knees. Every gesture is careful. Sudden freezes are hardest on fragile bodies. You pause at the doorway, watching the small rituals of emergency winter care unfold. Warming cloths, softened oils, warm drinks pressed into hands, children sent to fetch more embers. These moments reveal a truth about extreme cold. It forces a household into a temporary state of vigilance, everyone watching everyone else, checking for trembling fingers, pale lips, or the stillness that signals deeper trouble. In the hall, the mood is tense. The fire burns fiercely, but people sit closer than usual, shoulders touching, knees nearly overlapping. The heat can only reach so far, and the cold behind your back feels sharper for the contrast. Servants rush to hang extra tapestries along one drafty wall. They press them close, trying to seal invisible gaps. Even the noble family looks uneasy. A lord gestures sharply for more wood. A lady adjusts her fur cloak, her hands trembling. Sudden cold snaps shake the hierarchy. Winter, when it becomes extreme, is a great equalizer. You take your place near the hearth, feeling the fire battle against the cold pressing through the stones. You flex your fingers. They feel stiff despite your gloves. People murmur around you, comparing this winter to others, trading memories of frozen harvests or famine years. Some scholars argue that the Little Ice Age didn't strike everywhere at once, but arrived in waves, localized, dips in temperature, unpredictable freezes, sudden storms that reshaped entire seasons. Others maintain it was a more gradual shift, a slow tightening of climate patterns. Standing here today, witnessing a sudden plunge in temperature, you can feel the chaotic side of those theories. Winter can shift overnight from manageable to unforgiving. The fire pops loudly, sending sparks upward. A woman jumps at the sound. A boy presses closer to his father. Everyone senses it. This cold snap is not just weather, it is a reminder. A reminder that winter is older and stronger than stone walls. You draw your cloak around you and stay by the fire until your skin stops aching. Outside, the cold continues its silent work, thickening frost, tightening wood, slowing breath. And as night falls again, deeper and darker than before, you realize that the castle isn't simply enduring winter now. It is bracing against it. You wake the next morning with a strange heaviness in the air, as if the cold from yesterday hasn't simply returned but settled deeper into the castle's bones. The hearth in the hall is already burning when you arrive, yet the warmth circles close to the flames. Unwilling to travel far, people move more quietly than usual. Their steps are softer, their conversations are shorter. And as you walk into the dim corridor beyond the hall, you finally understand why winter in a medieval castle produces not only practical challenges, but also something far less tangible: fear. Not sharp, obvious fear, but a quiet unease that seeps into long nights and echoing rooms. Superstition grows best where the cold stays longest. You push open a side door and step into a small storage chamber. The air is dry and brittle, and the shadows gather thickly in corners. A servant is there, tying a bundle of dried herbs with shaking hands. When she sees you, she quickly touches a charm hanging around her neck, a tiny wooden token carved with a bird. A gesture made so quickly and naturally that she probably doesn't even realize she's done it. You move on, and a boy runs past you carrying a candle stub, whispering something under his breath. You catch only fragments of the words, something about keeping away the watching cold. When you follow him with your eyes, you see him place the candle behind a tapestry before hurrying away. The candle is unlit, just a symbolic presence, a guard against whatever fears slip into the castle at night. In winter, imagination has more fuel than fire does. You walk toward the chapel again and notice something resting on a windowsill, a sprig of evergreen tied with red thread. A woman nearby tells you, with a glance over her shoulder, that it keeps away wandering shadows. She doesn't elaborate. She doesn't need to. The cold outside makes even simple fears grow roots. Later, in the kitchen, as workers chop vegetables and stoke fires, someone tells a story that makes the others laugh nervously. It's about a creature that prowls winter nights, slipping through chimneys if the hearth is left unswept. The story is half warning, half entertainment. You feel an odd tension under the laughter, the kind that says people don't fully dismiss such tales. The castle's architecture itself lends weight to superstition. Drafts whisper through corridors like soft voices. Shutters bang suddenly in the wind. Chimneys groan. In tower rooms, wind spirals downward with a howl that sounds unmistakably alive. When you stand in those narrow spaces, you understand why someone would say, the winter wind carries spirits in its breath. As you cross one of the battlements, a guard tells you that he never whistles during winter nights. Bad luck, he says. It calls things that shouldn't be called. He shrugs afterward, embarrassed, but he does not whistle. Inside an upper chamber, a group of women work by a small brazier, spinning wool, while murmuring about a dream one of them had. A figure standing at her bedside, she says, dressed in frost, whispering warnings. The others listen seriously, offering interpretations. Maybe it means more cold is coming. Maybe someone will fall ill. Maybe the dream is just the wind playing tricks. Dreams in winter are currency. They're taken seriously because the season itself blurs logic at the edges. Near the stables, the shepherdess you saw earlier tells a different kind of winter tale. She says that when frost patterns appear on the barn door in shapes like feathers, it means a storm spirit passed by. She taps the wood 3 times before entering, a habit that seems to have been taught to her by her grandmother. You watch her do it without hesitation. Even the animals sometimes seem uneasy. A horse snorts nervously in its stall, stamping its feet in the icy straw. The stable hand crosses himself before calming it. When you ask why, he shrugs and says winter nights make animals see things humans cannot. He doesn't explain further. As you walk deeper into the castle, you notice small arrangements in corners, bundles of grain tied with twine, bowls of salted water left near certain doors. Some are practical, some are symbolic, and some exist in the blurry space between the two. One woman explains that salt keeps away the cold that steals breath. You suspect she does not mean literal cold. In a servant's room, someone has drawn a simple symbol on the wall, with charcoal, a circle with a line through it. It's meant to ward off fever spirits, they tell you. Winter illness always felt more threatening than summer sickness, and people developed rituals to match that fear. A circle to keep illness out, a line to divide the living from whatever else might roam. You step into the courtyard as evening approaches. The sky is dim purple, and snowflakes drift lazily through the air. A group of workers are lighting torches. One murmurs a small rhyme before touching flame to wick, something about keeping night frost from swallowing footsteps. It sounds childish, but everyone nearby nods softly, as if the rhyme carries weight. Near the outer wall, a man scatters ashes across a patch of ground. You think it's for traction, but he stops you with a raised hand and says the ashes also confuse malevolent spirits that follow heat from room to room. You look down at the darkened snow and try to decide whether he believes his own words. His eyes tell you yes. Inside the lower hall, a woman ties a red thread around a child's wrist, protection from winter fevers. She explains. The child beams proudly, showing it off to everyone. Whether it's medicine or magic or simply comfort doesn't matter. In winter, comfort becomes a kind of magic. Some historians debate how much medieval people truly believed these winter superstitions. Some argue they were taken quite seriously. Others think they were more symbolic habits passed down through generations. The truth likely lies in the middle. People used rituals because they offered structure in a season shaped by darkness and uncertainty. When medicine was limited and nights were long, stories filled the gaps logic could not. By the time you return to the great hall, evening has settled fully over the castle. Shadows gather in corners like quiet, listening figures. The fire crackles, offering its own kind of reassurance, its own bright logic. People sit close together, shoulders brushing, finding comfort in each other's presence. You settle among them, feeling the warmth on your face while your back senses the cold still waiting behind you. Winter brings practical dangers. Yes, cold snaps, freezing wells, brittle stone, but it also brings a second, more invisible season. A season of whispers, a season of half-seen shapes in torchlit corridors, a season of charms tucked behind tapestries, of herbs hung above beds, of old tales spoken in low voice. And tonight, as the fire hums quietly and snow gathers on the window ledges, you realize something profound. In a medieval winter, survival is as much about courage of the mind as warmth of the body. Night has settled over the castle like a heavy blanket, yet the stones underneath you stay cold as ever. You walk slowly toward a long, narrow chamber, where a few scholars and officials sometimes gather, one of the few rooms where minds, not hands, tend the fires of daily life. Tonight, you find two men and a woman sitting near a small brazier, rubbing their hands together and arguing gently in the kind of soft, weary tones winter demands. You take a seat on a low bench, and at first the conversation sounds ordinary: fuel shortages, upkeep of the outer walls, which passages need new rushes. But then you realize the topic has shifted to something far more intriguing: the castle itself. Why these walls remain cold no matter how many fires burn. Why drafts persist even when tapestries hang thick. Why winter inside stone always feels like winter multiplied. You lean in, sensing you're about to overhear the kind of debate that thrives only in places where cold encourages thinking as much as shivering. One scholar gestures toward the ceiling beams and says that the castle was never meant to be warm, only defensible. Stone keeps enemies out, he explains, but it also keeps cold in. He runs a hand over the wall as if tracing its faults. The stones are thick, heavy, and nearly impossible to warm fully. You nod. You've felt that truth on your skin since the first day. Another scholar counters that practicality alone doesn't explain everything. He argues that the builders could have added more internal wooden structures, more partitions, better insulation in certain rooms, if warmth had been a priority. He claims the castle's coldness reflects a mindset as much as a limitation, an acceptance, maybe even an expectation, that winter would always be harsh. You consider this and recall the cold corridors, the drafty stairwells, the rooms with only a single brazier to fight the season. Perhaps he's right. Perhaps winter was never meant to be conquered here, only tolerated. The woman sitting with them shakes her head with a small smile. She points out that different castles across Europe show different levels of winter adaptation. Some have thicker tapestries, some have better hearth designs, some have more internal wooden framing. She argues that what people see as bad heating might actually be the result of endless compromises: defense, cost, available materials, social expectations, and regional habits, all tugging in different directions. As they speak, you notice something comforting in their disagreement. They're not fighting, they're exploring. The castle becomes a puzzle, and winter its most stubborn clue. You warm your hands over the brazier, listening as the debate deepens. One points out that stone walls are often colder on the inside than on the outside during winter, since indoor fires create moisture that clings to stone. The others make thoughtful noises. Someone mentions that castles were often built quickly under political pressure, using available stone rather than insulating layers. Another chimes in that chimneys were still evolving in many regions, and earlier designs let more smoke escape than heat. You picture the great hall below, the fire glowing magnificently, while drafts sneak under doors and through gaps in shutters. It suddenly feels less like a flaw and more like a byproduct of the castle's entire identity. Strength has its price. Stone defends. Stone endures. Stone chills. Someone brings up the position of the castle on the hilltop. High ground makes for good defense, but bad warmth. Wind howls louder here, sweeping across battlements and diving through inner courtyards. Even the thickest walls can't silence it entirely. You think back to the morning on the battlements, when the frost swallowed the world in white. The wind that day felt almost personal. The scholars grow more animated as they talk. One claims that living conditions in castles were never meant to prioritize comfort. People with means often had secondary manners, warmer homes in sheltered valleys or lower towns, and used castles primarily as administrative or military centers. Wintering in a castle could be practical, yes, but hardly luxurious. You've seen evidence of this already in the constant efforts to create warmth, tapestries, rushes, bed curtains, braziers, heated stones. Comfort here is always an addition, never an assumption. Another scholar disagrees, saying that many castles were full-time homes for families and entire communities. He insists that builders must have considered winter more than we give them credit for. He cites the thick curtains, the layered rooms, the strategic placement of hearths, yet even he admits these solutions barely temper the cold. The woman smiles thoughtfully and offers a middle path. She suggests that castles evolved slowly, generation by generation, each new builder responding more to immediate needs than long-term comfort. A lord might reinforce a wall against invasion but neglect a cold draft in the hall. A lady might install better bed curtains but leave the floor bare stone. Bit by bit, improvements gathered, but the underlying structure remained the same: immense, impressive, and inherently cold. Listening to them, you begin to feel that the castle's chill is not a failure of design, but a legacy, a reminder that warmth here is earned, not granted. Someone shifts the topic toward chimneys again. Early chimney designs often drew smoke poorly or sent warmth straight upward instead of into rooms. Many castles relied on open hearths that heated bodies but not architecture, and even with better chimneys in later centuries, stone remained slow to absorb heat and quick to release it. That explains why rooms cool so quickly once fires die. A servant enters quietly to replenish the brazier with fresh coals. The scholars pause, nodding in gratitude. The moment stretches as the coals glow brighter and a thin wave of warmth spreads outward. You realize how dependent everyone is on these small islands of heat. After the servant leaves, one scholar remarks that some medieval buildings in warmer regions used thick plaster, wooden beams, or even clay within walls to adjust temperature. But castles built for war had different priorities. If the choice was between warmth and a strong outer wall, strength always won. You sit with that thought, understanding it more deeply because you've lived inside these walls for so many days now. Winter in a castle is not an oversight. It's a condition of existence. The people who lived here didn't try to defeat winter. They learned to live beside it. The discussion drifts toward the idea of medieval resilience. People accepted hardship as part of life, not as something to be engineered away completely. Cold was a season, not a problem. Comfort came from community, ritual, daily work, and countless tiny solutions, not from architectural perfection. There's a moment of silence then, a deep, thoughtful quiet. The brazier crackles softly, and one scholar finally says that understanding winter in a castle means understanding the entire mindset of the era, a world where survival was a shared project, not a private guarantee. Some researchers today still examine why medieval castles remained so cold despite centuries of occupation. Was it intentional, accidental, practical, cultural? The debate continues. Sitting here now, surrounded by stone and flickering firelight, you sense the answer might be a blend of many truths stitched together by necessity. You rise slowly, feeling the stiffness in your legs where the chill has settled again. The scholars continue talking softly behind you, but their voices fade as you step back into the corridor. Drafts meet you instantly. Shadows cling to corners, distant footsteps echo, and the castle feels once more like a creature of stone and cold, formidable, indifferent, magnificent. Yet now you understand its nature more deeply. It was never meant to keep winter out completely. It was meant to give winter a place to pass through, slowly, while life inside carried on. You step out of the scholar's chamber and into a corridor where the air feels painfully still. The cold settles around you like a last lesson, quiet but insistent. You walk slowly, letting the castle guide your steps the way it has since the first night you arrived. Each wall, each stair, each draught seems suddenly familiar, as if you've learned the rhythms of winter in this place, the same way you might learn the habits of an old friend. You descend toward the lower courtyard. The sky outside is pale, the kind of late winter light that feels more like a memory of sunlight than the real thing. Your boots crunch through frost that has been trampled by countless feet. Despite the lingering cold, something has shifted. The air tastes slightly different, less sharp, less metallic. You can't name it at first, but then you see it. A thin trickle of water moves along the edge of the courtyard stones, where yesterday everything was frozen solid. A thaw. Not a warm breeze, not a burst of spring, not a triumphant ending, just a small, stubborn loosening of winter's grip, a reminder that the season cannot hold forever. You follow the water to the well, where two servants stand wrapped in cloaks. One leans over the edge, looking down with cautious hope. The ice that had sealed the top is cracking. He reaches with a pole, taps gently, and the surface trembles. A thin layer breaks apart with a soft crackle. He grins, teeth flashing white in the cold. This tiny moment, water moving again, is the castle's first breath after being held still for weeks. You walk along the outer wall, and the light seems slightly brighter. Snow still rests in corners, but the shadows feel less heavy. A group of children run past you, chasing each other with sticks, their laughter rising like sparks. Their energy seems newly awakened, as if the promise of change has reached them before it reached the adults. Inside the sheds, animals shift differently too. The sheep bleat softly, as if sensing something in the air. A horse stamps its hoof and snorts, shaking frost from its mane. Even the chickens seem livelier, pecking at straw with sharper enthusiasm. Winter doesn't leave all at once, it loosens slowly, one detail at a time. You pass a small window slit and see sunlight hitting the nearby hillside. It spills across patches of dead grass and frozen earth, and for just a breath, the landscape almost looks warm. Not truly, not yet, but almost. You step back inside and notice the castle feels subtly changed. Fires still burn, people still shiver, but something lighter moves beneath it all, as if everyone has silently acknowledged that the hardest part has been endured. In the hall, workers carry bundles of rushes to clean and replace. A few laugh as they spill onto the floor. Nearby, two cooks argue playfully about whether it's too early to prepare certain spring dishes. A musician plucks at a stringed instrument, humming under his breath. Even the tone of footsteps seems different, less weighed down, less wary. Near the hearth, the noblewoman warms her hands. She looks up at you and points toward the window where sunlight touches the stone. She doesn't speak, but the look in her eyes says everything. Change is coming. You wander toward the courtyard again, drawn by the brightness. At the gate, a guard leans against the wall, rubbing his hands together with a thoughtful expression. He comments that the worst winds have quieted, that the sky has a softness he hasn't seen in months. His voice carries the tired relief of someone who has held the same position night after night in freezing air. You stand beside him for a moment, watching the last of the frost sparkle like crushed glass. The cold still lingers, but for the first time, you feel it retreating, shrinking at the edges. Winter is ending the way it began, not suddenly, not loudly, but with quiet determination. You walk along the interior passage one last time, brushing your fingers along the tapestry that has guarded the wall all season. The fabric is cool to the touch. Soon it will be taken down, shaken outside, aired in sunlight. Soon the heavy curtains around beds will be pulled back. Soon fires will burn smaller, less desperately. Soon movement will feel like choice, not necessity. You pause at the entrance to the great hall. People are gathered around the long table, speaking in gentle tones. Someone has placed early spring herbs on the hearth evergreen. Yes, but smelling fresher than the ones that hung all winter. The hall feels hopeful in a way it never has before. You sit for a moment, soaking in the final lessons of this long season. You think of the fires, the heavy cloaks, the steaming stews. You think of rushes underfoot, tapestries on walls, bed curtains drawn tight against the night. You think of women's hands spinning wool, children wrapped in layers, elders warmed by stones. You think of the stable's animal breath, the healer's herbs, the traveler's stories of winters far from here. And you realize that surviving winter in a medieval castle is not one lesson, it is dozens of small lessons layered together, 1,000 decisions made every day, a web of craft, ritual, work, and care, woven so tightly that even the cold cannot unravel it. You rise, step outside, and breathe the crisp air deeply. The wind is still cold, but its edge has softened. Somewhere nearby, water drips steadily from a thawing eave, marking rhythm like a patient drum. The first true sound of the season turning. You walk toward the gate, and as you pass under its arch, you feel the last hint of winter brush your cheeks, one final, gentle reminder of everything you have endured. And then you step out into the softening light. Your winter in the castle is ending. The air outside the castle loosens around you, just slightly, just enough to let your shoulders relax. You feel your steps lengthen as the path softens under melting frost. Each breath comes warmer than the last. You pause once, turning back to look at the castle, the stone walls catching a faint shimmer of morning light, the towers standing steady after months of quiet struggle. As you watch, your thoughts slow naturally, the way they do at the end of a long day or the close of a story told by firelight. The cold that shaped so many nights begins to slip away from your memory, melting into gentler impressions. The smell of wool warming near a hearth, the sound of snow drifting against shutters, the soft hush of footsteps on rush-covered floors. Even the darkest nights come back now, not as threats, but as moments held carefully in the quiet of your mind. You breathe again, slower this time, letting the last of the winter tension leave your body. Imagine the warmth settling into your hands, into your chest, into the space behind your eyes. Imagine the firelight dimming to embers, soft and steady. Imagine the castle resting, its halls hushed, its rooms no longer battling the season, but breathing into spring. The world feels softer now. The sky stretches wider. The cold grows fainter with every heartbeat. Let that softness gather around you. Let it hold you, the way heavy blankets once did. Let your thoughts drift like slow snowflakes, falling into a quiet place where nothing demands your attention. You've walked through a long winter. You've earned this rest. Sleep gently now,